Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening all. Bonjour et bienvenue. A very warm welcome back on behalf of MYT and AMP's events team. We are very much looking forward to supporting you with day 3 of the Alliance for Malaria Prevention's annual partners meeting. So I'm now delighted to hand over to Suzanne to welcome you to today's session.
Thanks, Debbie. So good morning or good afternoon and a warm welcome to everyone. Thanks again for rejoining this annual meeting on its 3rd day. So today we are going to focus on COVID-19 adaptations and distribution outcomes. So 2 years after the start of the pandemic, I think you will all agree with me when I say that all countries have done an impressive job in adapting their malaria programs or activities, including distributing more than 160 million ITNs despite the pandemic in 2021. So similarly to previous days, we have broken out the day in 3 sections with a period of discussion and a break at the end of each section. The first section will be hearing from the Global Fund Against Malaria Foundation and the President's Malaria Initiative on the supply chain situation, followed by Madagascar on mobilizing resources for supplies. After a short break, Mozambique will be discussing their innovations in waste management efforts, and Liberia will be sharing how they have addressed COVID-19 related rumors. And in our last section of the day, we'll have a presentation looking at multi-country review and adaptations and potential cost drivers for COVID-19 adapted campaigns, followed by Nigeria, who will be speaking around qualitative process evaluation and quantitative analysis of end process results for COVID-19 adapted campaigns. And then we'll wrap up the day with a discussion around considerations for the AMP partnership in 2022 and for the next year, before moving to the exciting AMP 2021 awards. So before we get started, we'll have our daily poll. In case you were not with us in the last 2 days, we'll show you how to join the virtual poll using Mentimeter. Okay, so here you can see here on the slides, if you're on your laptop, again, we recommend that you use your mobile phone so you can stay within the Zoom meeting on your computer. But if you don't have a mobile phone or it's not accessible, you can also just open up another window in your computer and type in, again, go to www.menti.com. And the code that you will have to enter is on your screen now. And it will always be on the top of your slide in case you don't see this slide. The code is 68329250. So the question that we would like to hear from you today is, in one word, can you please describe how you are feeling about the outlook on or the future of the pandemic, personally or as it relates to your ITN campaigns? And this goes with the theme of today's session on COVID-19 adaptations. So, exhausted, okay. Hopeful, flexible, optimistic, confused. So a mix of positives and not so positives. Creative thinking needed, yeah, unsure. Okay, so a mix of different feelings, both in terms of personally or maybe around the future of your ITN campaigns. But looks like hopeful is still predominant. Maybe flexible, I think, yes, that's really, I think we've seen countries really adapting in many different ways and coming up with creative solutions with whatever comes their way with the COVID-19 pandemic. So yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for participating. As usual, we'll keep this open as we move forward with the day, and we'll come back to the poll later today. So to kick us off, we're going to hear from a combination of donors, notably from Clarice Morris, who's from the Global Fund. She works with the Global Sourcing. She's with the Global Fund as a global sourcing specialist for vector control products. We're also going to hear from Julian Austin, who is the Operations Director at Against Malaria Foundation, and from Chris Warren, who is PMI's Senior Supply Chain Technical Advisor. So together, they're going to share with us the supply chain situation and the outlook for 2022. So over to you, Clarice.
Thanks a lot for that introduction. So yes, we're going to talk about upstream issues, and it's quite clear that 2 years ago, just before COVID really started having an impact, we didn't realize how long it would last. We would guesstimate, a few months, then a few quarters. And now here we are 2 years later, still looking at significant challenges in the supply chain, not just for ITNs, of course, but globally. So we are going to look at, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to start with a general overview of the current situation. And after that, I'll give Global Fund's perspective on the challenges that we have experienced in 2021 specifically. Followed by Chris and then Julian for their perspectives from PMI and AMF respectively. So right now, the situation is still heavily impacted by COVID-19. At some point, there really became, we got a shortage basically of shipping containers that has persisted. That has an effect on the available freight capacity, not just in the containers are an issue, but also the vessels are an issue. The capacity right now is unreliable. So very often there have been cancellations when bookings have been made, and that really causes delays in many cases. The reduced number of shipping containers continues to be an issue. And of course, we only rely on sea shipment for ITNs. So we have really noticed a delay in booking containers from India, China, and Vietnam. And basically it's because the whole system got disrupted with COVID, and there are thousands of containers that are stuck in places that are no longer serviced by vessels. Then on top of that, there are disruptions and sometimes congestion at ports. It can be due to lockdowns or other issues, which means that vessels can be stranded at the port at sea and have to wait for weeks before they can actually get the goods on land for discharge. And another issue that started for us at least last year is related to the freight costs. There was an increase last year compared to the budgets, and it was related to the shortage on the market, and the prices just went up and up and up as demand also increased. But right now we are expecting a further increase in the second quarter because there is a crude oil price hike that's going on, and that effect is not going to be immediate. But from the second quarter, we should see another increase in freight costs, which is quite concerning, of course, because the budgets are limited and already strained. And another issue that's not so much related to delivery and supply is the crude oil price will also affect the plastics price, leading to increased product costs. So I think this picture is really what we're facing right now. And that affects all donors and all countries. It's not at all looking good for the moment. And I think it's important to keep this context in mind. It is really related to COVID, and on top of that, the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. So we're all in the same situation when it comes to that. Now for Global Fund, I work in the supply operations department, and we manage the pooled procurement mechanism. So that procurement mechanism procured 133 million nets last year, which was the biggest year we've had so far. And obviously that we encountered a number of challenges in that procurement and delivery as well. With the delayed shipments, as I just mentioned already, sometimes there are not sufficient containers and we have to wait for a long time to get them, or the vessels that we need are not available, or the bookings are canceled at last minute. So that basically means that suppliers then are required to store the nets for longer than anticipated. So far, suppliers have been quite generous in allowing us to store for free. But of course, there's a limit to that if that continues for several months. And on top of that, once the supplier warehouses are full, that also leads to basically a backlog in production, because more nets that are produced cannot actually be stored. There's no more space. Some suppliers have gone out to rent warehouses outside of their production facility at their cost. Again, they've been very, I think, flexible and generous so far, but if this increases, that can really become a problem that's not manageable, which means that there will be storage costs added to the grants. I already mentioned that the freight cost increased last year, and if there are further increases, that puts pressure on grants budgets as well. And how that needs to be managed is not yet clear. In our case, it's quite difficult, especially for the larger orders, or for the small grants that don't have any kind of space left on the budget or savings. Now, the impact of these challenges, first of all, there's a booking delay of about 4 to 5 weeks that needs to be taken into account, and that's mainly booking of the vessels to actually carry the nets out. And we've included that in our total estimated lead time. 2 years ago, we would say pyrethroid nets take up to 6 months to be delivered in a standard case where everything is clear. And for PBO nets, it was about 10 months, but with the delays we've seen, we've extended this to 8 months and 12 months. Nevertheless, I do need to just emphasize that this is still an estimate. It's basically taking into account anticipated COVID delays, but if there are any other issues, either because the requisition isn't clear when it's placed in Wambo, which is our procurement tool, either because the specs are different or certain information is not available, or we don't know, we don't have the delivery points already uploaded, some of those issues will increase the administrative lead time already on the front end. And then once the nets are produced, but if we cannot ship because there are other issues, either the green light is not provided or there's still issues with warehousing in country and we cannot ship because of that, that will still increase the lead time as well. So this should not be taken as set in stone. And of course, it also depends on how large an order is and where the country is located. I mean, larger orders can take a very long time to get everything shipped and delivered. Now, in terms of what we are trying to do to mitigate against these risks and challenges, we are staggering the shipments into smaller lots. So for example, 5 containers, just so that that's easier to actually get availability and ship them out. We've reduced that number down to, I think, about 5 now, and that seems to be working. It's also important for us to know what is the delivery period that the PR can actually receive the goods, because right now in our system, we only have a need by date, so one date. But actually, if we have to stagger the deliveries in so many different smaller lots, we need to also know when can we start delivering, because sometimes the warehouses are not yet available, or at least it's not known to us when they are available. And we're also going to look into if that can be something that features in Wambo so that you can enter 2 dates. So when can we start and when is the final date that you need the goods to be there? And also from our experience last year, the procurement agent has now started some project-based work with larger countries to collaborate with the freight forwarders and the PRs and Global Fund to have more regular engagements. So every 2 weeks, they sit together and talk about the current orders, the status, the delivery, basically going nitty-gritty level to know where everything is and what's anticipated. And we've noticed that that closer collaboration really works. I mean, Global Fund does not have a field presence. We're not in country, so we need to find another way to avoid just having emails of Excel sheets that are just flowing around. That doesn't really work. And this project-based approach where we have a video conference every other week, that seems to work better. And we continue that approach. I think even when there's no more COVID, I think it's a better way to work, especially on these big campaigns. We will also continue requesting countries to place orders as early as possible. That is not just because the order needs to be produced earlier. First of all, we need to know when orders are expected so that we can inform the suppliers of what's coming and they can plan their production better. But this improved visibility also helps to plan the container availability so that we can basically have a shorter lead time because we anticipated how many containers we would need to book in a certain period. And that really helps to smoothen out the whole process. So I think that whenever that is possible, we really encourage countries to place their orders and just put the date that you need the nets, but also, yeah, it helps us to plan the whole chain of events a bit better. And finally, I wanted to highlight that the Global Fund produces a delivery planning guide. It's online in English and French. And the links are here. That if I don't know how this document will be shared, but hopefully the links will work. And that guide indicates for all the different commodities that we have, at what time an order should be placed for timely delivery. Because I think we've seen a lot of orders that come in at a shorter deadline than is feasible or reasonable in the current situation. And it just leads to disappointment, especially when it comes to ITNs, because we don't really have a way to accelerate the process. So we need a timely order placement to just start the process. If it's already late, then it just becomes worse when there is also a COVID delay or some other issue in the chain that's not functioning well. So that's the last point I wanted to highlight. And then we're going to move to the next speaker, Chris.
Thanks, Clarice. And Clarice, we could probably just rename this slide deck based on what you just said, is in terms of we are all in the same situation. So there will be some repetition, but we could also say we're all in the same boat. And these are boats that neither PMI, Global Fund, or AMF owns or operates. And so we are really dependent on these upstream actions. So a lot of repetition here, but it helps reinforce that this is a consistent problem. Yes, there are shortages in containers, shortages in the raw material. These are either created or compounded by lockdowns that are stopping ports or manufacturing operations. And in this kind of sort of crisis management environment, we are seeing sometimes that the carriers are not able to honor the contract rates that are negotiated well in advance. However, as of December, and PMI's metrics and indicators can be lagging, we are not actually seeing a significant increase in freight costs due to COVID. However, there is definitely a similar impact on lead times, 3 to 5 weeks for delays, for pickups. We're getting bumped from ships, so sailings are being pushed forward. And then once nets are under on the ocean, we're seeing additional delays wherever they're being transshipped at ports like Singapore or something like that. Similarly to what Clarice pointed out, how PMI is trying to address some of these things is that we are maintaining an allocation strategy across manufacturers to make sure that we are not breaking the market and we're able to spread the risk around a little bit. Similarly, we are also reducing the quantity of each shipment lot to reduce the quantity of required containers to be sourced at any one time. What we're doing here in terms of mitigating actions, I've been describing sort of that upstream, what we're doing in advance from the manufacturing, but we're doing that in conjunction with trying to manage the messaging and the information that it's being either conveyed to country planners or coming up from country planners. We're really emphasizing consistent communication and updates. We're encouraging accuracy and clarity within that cross-stakeholder communication. One of the things that we're really doing is we're really trying to stress the appropriate use of the correct language when we're talking about different phases of the procurement cycle in order to not create misunderstandings or false assumptions, or just to be able to generally manage the expectations of all stakeholders. And so we sometimes will interject ourselves when we hear about a procurement underway, when really what's being talked about is very much a planning phase about how much of a particular net is needed, but it's really not even moved into what we would traditionally call the procurement phase. And so that can lead to misunderstanding at a country level, thinking that something is well underway or has progressed along the lines of procurement, when in fact, not even the initial requisition or the order has even been generated and communicated to the marketplace. And I will now pass it over to Austin.
Thanks very much, Chris. And as Clarice and Chris both mentioned, these are really global challenges that we're facing. So the things that you'll see on this slide are very aligned with what has been said by Global Fund and PMI. Just as a quick overview, AMF is currently procuring between 30 to 50 million nets per year. And we work very closely with PMI and Global Fund, who fund the shipping of those nets. We've experienced delays in our orders primarily due to lack of shipping containers, but also in some other areas such as delays in production due to lockdowns. You know, some of these issues with being booted off ships, longer time when there's transport shipments. So really very much in in the same situation. And this has generally caused delays in the order of weeks, but it has gone up to months in some countries, particularly those that that are landlocked or that require cross-border transport to reach them. So DRC is an example of that, where we've had a few orders that have been quite significantly delayed. And in terms of mitigation, I think we'd all agree that we don't have a miracle solution, but that we do think that the key is really to order nets sooner. And we're increasing our lead times to over 12 months prior to distribution, particularly, as Clarice mentioned, when procuring PBO or dual AI nets. And I think the other thing that really helps, as was touched upon, is just keeping this open and regular dialogue between partners, both upstream and downstream, and really getting into the details so that everyone is on the same page. And like Chris said, everyone's speaking the same language, so that way we are avoiding misunderstandings and helping to set expectations. And also, when everybody's on the same page, if something does change, it means that plans can be adjusted quickly where needed. And I think that really helps everybody to deal with this challenging situation as best possible. I think that's it from us. Thanks, Clarice, thanks, Chris, and thank you everybody for listening, and looking forward to question and answer.
Yeah, thank you very much for the three of you for your honest outlook on some of the significant challenges that we face in the global supply chain, including possible increase in costs, but also for sharing some of the key mitigation actions that you're all taking, but also that countries and partners alike can take. So before we move to the next presentation, we'd like to continue to encourage you to input your questions into the chat. When you put your question into the chat, please ensure that you state which institution you're from and who the question is asked to. Also, the next presentation is in French. So for English speakers, if you could please ensure that you have picked up the English channel under the interpretation. So I'd like now to give the floor to Dr. Sahara Habereriosa, who heads the Integrated Vector Management Division of Madagascar's PNLP. And she will be sharing with us their experience with mobilizing local resources. Dr. Sahara, à vous.
Oui, merci, Suzanne. Bonjour à tous.
Yes, thank you very much, Suzanne. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We have the pleasure of presenting today our experience in terms of local resources mobilization in the framework of the implementation of the MASS campaign in mid-2021. Couple of minutes, my colleague will give you the control on the slides.
If you could just assign control to Sarah, please. Okay. Très bien,
D'accord.
merci.
D'accord. Nous allons
So here's the plan of my presentation. You will see in this presentation the plan. As an introduction, this is the context of the Madagascar. Following the data of the health information, malaria represents the first cause of morbidity and the fifth cause of hospital mortality. In an increase and a continuous increase of the incidence is seen in the last 5 years, from 18.95% to 85.01 from 2016 to 2021, with a hospital mortality of 1.9 over 100,000 inhabitants. Now, to give you the context, here you have the evolution on the left-hand side, the evolution of the cases of malaria from 2016 through 2021, and on the right-hand side, the evolution of the death because of malaria, going from 471,000 to more than 2 million. The peak was in 2018, where we had the second campaign for mortality. So the mass campaign has been implemented in August 2021 over 21 regions, 101 districts in Madagascar. On the map, you see all the districts that receive the ITN from the Global Fund. In orange, PMI ones, and in the white, the districts that were not targeted. After this campaign has been planned to cover more than 23 million of inhabitants and target more than 5 million of households, with a total of over 13 million ITNs to distribute. Distribution 17,970 fin, which is the base point for all the distribution directly attached to more than 2,000 health trainings. In respect to the COVID-19 situation, the first case was declared in March 2020, and in the beginning of 2021, we get in the second wave at the moment where we were preparing the campaign. Certain measures have been implemented, like forbidding of regrouping people in the zones that are in red in the map. So we had to postpone the micro planning, the Pascal training, and the advocacy actions. Sorry. That's why a contingency plan was developed in order to continue the activity. We have several plans that were proposed: Plan A for weak transmission areas and Plan B for high transmission area. A plan was the initial plan elaborated prior to the pandemic, but the common part of the plan was the adoption of virtual formats and the using of digital supports throughout all processes of the organization. The difference was on the authentication parts, distribution, and social advocacy. For Plan A, these are done separately after the recording of the information of the households, and distribution of the coupon that people in the households would have to bring to retrieve the ITNs. In Plan B, authentication and distribution are done at the same time in parallel. Also for house calls, house visits, for Plan A and Plan B have different solution for advocacy as well. At the moment of distribution, we chose Plan A, so the initial plan when the COVID situation got better at the time. What were the challenges we had to face? The delay in materials. The delivery was forecasted for October 2021, but in the end, they get to us to December 2021, and the distribution had to take place on August 2021 for the PPE. The transport for these PPEs were not forecasted in the initial budget. So homologated face mark like the FFP2 were not available in local markets, and also to buy the hand washing products, the local production was not enough to sustain the need, and the transport from the RP to the different location was difficult and tardy. So we ask the Ministry of Health to coordinate the COVID response on a country level, and also to the Commerce and Industry Ministry to increase production with the local producer, in order to be able to implement the campaign respecting the timeline we had. We carried out advocacy actions throughout the partners of the private sector collaborating with the program. Our approach consists to ask them to realign the budget with the Global Fund and other partners. And for hand washing materials, this has been asked on a regional level, a district level, in order to be able to carry out the distribution. After these advocacy and mobilization, you have the division here of the PPIs throughout the different partners and donors. So Red Cross, WHO, and so on and so forth. This is the graphic representing the different contribution. And since there was not a budget allocated for the transport of the PPEs, we had asked throughout the different layers help to transport the PPIs, and also the civil society and different NGOs participated this in order to be able to transport the PPEs, at the same time, in collaboration also with local authorities under the coordination of the Ministry of Health and the National Authority on Health. We are seeing now the main results of the mass campaign, starting with the authentication data. On the right-hand side, you have the number of population and households authenticated, 27,640,927. And you see the data respectively by area. And on the right-hand side, the households identified in respect to the base authorization. So the completion of data is 98.8%. We extracted this data on the DHSI2. Now on distribution data, a completion rate on 98%. We recorded a total of 13,120,355, and we remained at 249,150. More than 6 million people participated in the demonstration and the distribution. Here are the distribution data with the logistics data. For households, we had a covering of 2.03, so one net for people. Some illustration of the campaign, either by boat, by lorry, or on foot, as you can see. Always illustration of the advocacy and demonstration, the verification of the different coupons, and the acquiring of the beneficiaries from the distributor of the nets. In a conclusion, despite all difficulties we went through, we managed to implement the campaign over the 101 districts following the initial plan, thanks to the advocacy done with our partners and local mobilization, especially for the PPE that were needed to do that because of COVID, in order to protect us from the pandemic. So the first report we did of the campaign on the HS2 is really good. We needed to finalize the reports on several districts, and so on several districts the distribution was delayed because of constraints. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm at your disposal for commentaries, doubts, or questions. Thank you.
Des adaptations que vous avez faites, et aussi sur le plan de contingence par rapport à la mobilisation.
Thank you very much for your help and your presentation. It was very interesting. So now we will start with the Q&A session.
Please put yourself back on videos, and if your bandwidth allows for the question session. Thank you. So the first question is to Clarisse, Chris, and Julian. The question is, with commodity price increases, how will prices be mitigated and budgeted for? Also, will partners be prioritizing shipments geographically according to campaign dates or other criteria?
On the second part of the question, we do look at allocation based on timing of needs. So that is a factor when looking at the allocation across manufacturers.
That is the same for Global Fund. The question in terms of how are we going to work on, I don't know who else is, I hear someone else. How we're going to work on price increases, I think that is under discussion to see if it needs to come from the grants themselves or if we need to have a special separate fund to manage these price increases. That is under discussion right now because this issue already started in the last quarter of last year.
Yeah, thanks, and totally aligned with that. We also look at it sort of country by country in terms of which are the areas that need to be prioritized in shipping, which have the longer lead times. And yeah, these are hard questions on the in terms of the the pinch on funding, and commodity prices are linked to oil price, which has been rising recently, as you all know, Clarisse mentioned. How to mitigate that is we'd obviously be interested to hear other your thoughts as well. Yesterday we heard that there's countries that were doing further stratification, for example, removing provincial capitals from the net need in distributions. But these are all imperfect solutions, and so very welcoming of other ideas as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question is to Dr. Sarah. What vector control measures are in place in the areas not covered with the mass campaign? Dr. Sarah, vous avez compris la question?
Oui, merci pour
Did
la
you
question.
understand the question? Yes, thank you very much. So in our strategic plan for the district who didn't receive, who were not integrated in the mass campaign, there seemed to be a lagging internet connection. So we're trying to work on an environmental approach and on continuous distribution. Your internet connection was lagging, so maybe you could repeat your last sentence, please. In these districts, we kept on organizing activities of fighting against to fight for vector control, and we're doing household visits, and we're also having an environmental approach with the community. Great, thank you.
Chris and Julian. So taking into account regular delivery to country delays causing distribution day modifications, would you recommend when doing macro planning adding a buffer time of 4 weeks or 8 weeks to country arrival date, although this would increase storage rental costs? Is the question clear?
From a PMI perspective, the question is clear. However, the lead times that we're providing for standard PBO and dual AI nets reflect that sort of aggregate and the average lead time from the point of the requisition being raised to delivery, so that they should account for that that variation. Factoring in buffer and factoring in the mitigation for delays wherever that disruption may be is critically important. I'm not sure about sort of accumulating little bits of buffer along that delivery path, but planning, there should be some factoring into that. But what we're communicating is the best known timing that we have. We can also provide more granularity in terms of the lead time per country per shipment.
I think on our side, the offering of lead time is for all countries. It's an average or estimate, so we don't have it broken down. But of course, that can be provided for larger countries. But I'm not sure if the question is about one of the points that discussed we start delivering earlier throughout a longer period, and that's why they need to have longer warehouse time. If it's related to that, then yes, probably it's needed, but I'm not sure if that was the intention.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's one of comes back in a way to the overarching point of the close communication being really valuable here, because it might be that it's a situation where the shipments are going to be coming in a sort of a solid flow. And so the key is the actual total capacity needed is lower, but it's over a longer period of time, and vice versa for some other countries. So I think probably that regular and open dialogue to make sure that everyone is on the same page is the best mitigation strategy here.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that was a question from Jean-Marc. So Jean-Marc, if you have any clarifications, please either raise your hand or we can take it from the chat as well. Donc la prochaine question, c'est à vous, Dr. Sarah. Donc la question c'est, j'ai vu que vous
The
avez
question is, I say that you planned the distribution for a population of 23 million, and at the end you registered over 27 million, and you still had ITN leftovers, even though the quantity procured was based on the target population number. Was the ITN allocation changed during the campaign, or did you cap the number of ITNs that a household could receive? Thank you for the question. So indeed, there was an increase of 4 million people compared to what we planned. So we decided to adjust the number of ITNs we could distribute per household. And this was very efficient, just to increase the number of ITNs per household. Thank you.
Back to you, Clarisse, Chris, and Julian. For all 3 ITN purchasers, lead times are increasing with no sign of reversal. Could you briefly touch on supplier capacity? Also, any more thoughts on feasibility interest of regional warehouses for ITNs?
So in terms of capacity, in general, there is sufficient capacity for all the products, for all procurers. Of course, the idea is not that we all come at the same time with our orders. The issue is that we have clear communication on what's expected by when, so that the capacity can be planned appropriately. And there's not a peak here and then a couple of months with no production, because these nets are in general made to order, and workers also need to be engaged on a month by month basis. So I would not say there's a capacity issue at the moment, but more a planning and coordination issue to make sure that the capacity is used appropriately, and also to emphasize that the large buyers, so PMI and Global Fund and AMF, we actually engage regularly to find out when we are placing orders, and so that we can make sure that we don't show up at the same time, or we know what's expected, especially for PBO nets, because there's a limited number of suppliers, and in some cases we are supplying to the same country. So it's good to know when the orders are going to be placed for the different donors. The second part of the question was about regional warehousing. I don't think we have considered that or thought about that at this point, but yeah, if it's continuing, we may need to look at some more creative solutions, but that would also require standardization of products, which right now, it's a bit different between PMI and us. We still have different colors, but we do have a similar range of sizes, so limited number of sizes. But we have plenty of countries that ask for logos and languages, et cetera, as customizations. So if we're thinking about storing nets, producing them in advance and storing them in closer to the countries, we would need to really standardize that to one color and maybe a multilingual label or something like that. And that would be it. Over.
Interesting.
Nothing to add on that.
Chris, you're on mute.
Thanks, Clarice. And because it's not so much a production capacity issue, but a production planning issue, and nets are being made to order, they really are in continuous motion. There isn't a lot of buffer being manufactured that you could strategically pull out of production and place in order to be able to respond, particularly to campaign-driven needs. And then even though PMI does have a narrow range of specifications, that there is still a range of specifications, different sizes, that would be very difficult to adapt to a stockpiling situation. Thanks.
Just one other thing to add to that is also, like you said, there's the size, there's the labeling, and then there's obviously the net type which is often really tailored for the resistance profile of the area that it's going to be distributed in. So one type of net may not be the right type of net for another distribution. So that adds another layer of complexity into the whole stockpiling and the regional warehouse question.
All right, thank you for those clarifications. Donc la prochaine question, c'est pour vous, Dr. Sarah. Je vous la lis en anglais.
Next question is for you, Sarah.
Ratio is higher than 1 for 2 people, as was initially planned. Will you plan any intensified continuous distribution approach to be able to increase coverage?
Oui, effectivement, la stratégie de distribution continue.
Yes, indeed. We relied on the continuous distribution strategy to work in parallel with the mass campaign and to reach universal coverage. The continuous distribution starts 1 year after the mass campaign, and especially in districts strongly hit by malaria.
So back to you, Clarisse and Chris and Julian. With the increased price for ITNs, the trade-off between coverage and distribution of effective ITNs could be problematic. How will funders balance costs and the recommendation from yesterday to align ITN types once the transition to a new ITN type takes place?
That's a very good question and a tricky question as well. And it's not something I can answer because I don't work in the grant management division who manages the budgets and the grants. So unless my colleagues who are here want to give an initial answer, but it's something that is beyond my my remit.
And it's also looking at the total funding envelope and the prioritization of different investments. So it has to be looked at holistically across what is the allocation for the country across all interventions, not just commodities, and particularly not just LLINs. It is a challenge and will continue to be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely is a really good question, a really difficult one. From the MF perspective, we have a slightly different funding model. We fill gaps and we fund nets. So in the countries that we're working in the past, sometimes where we've seen that there have been costs that have gone up due to commodity prices or freight price increases, one of the ways that we're able to respond to that is by increasing in a way the number of nets that we fund, that then frees up some funding in the Global Fund or PMI budgets that can then be put into the the shipping or to go to fill the gaps that there are in that campaign. So that's one way, but it's not a silver bullet, unfortunately. This is a big these are big forces that are acting on all the portfolios.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I don't know if you have any other colleagues from the Global Fund who want to answer that question. You're more than welcome to just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Oh, here, Susie. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think Dimby, can you mute yourself? Okay, he's muted himself. Sorry about that. I think from our perspective, our guidance is to not go back. I think Kate and Tin mentioned that yesterday is once you change to a PBO or an IG2 that you shouldn't go back to a different type. And we do the best we can to balance the different priorities across the malaria program to ensure that we can support that if there is a gap. And we use different levers, of course, to try to mobilize resources such as portfolio optimization, which is a key thing that we use to prioritize such gaps if there are any. And we also look between cycles, which will be important between now and the next funding cycle, what countries have done and what resources potentially could be needed so that we can help countries plan ahead to make sure that they can keep the same product or an even more expensive one if that's required where it's needed. Over.
Great, thank you, Susie. Chris, did you want to say something else?
Sure. I talked about the challenge of this within an overall funding envelope for all interventions, but looking just at the segment of funding that's available for ITN programming, one of the things that PMI is trying to promote and solve for with limited funding is if we recognize that there could be increased costs for the product itself, are there ways that we can reduce costs for programming, particularly when it comes to in-country warehousing? If we could address some of the continued need for PMI funding of warehousing and transportation through active engagement by partners, not only within the malaria programs, but within the government programs to mobilize resources that may be available that have currently never really been tapped into, particularly for warehousing across the public sector as an opportunity for both a sort of an in-kind contribution by other partners, as well as to solve this problem of overall cost for programming. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go back to Dr. Sarah. From your point of view, what were the key successes factors in resource mobilization and what are the challenges?
Merci pour la question. En fait, comme
Thank you very much for the question. So, as I said in my presentation previously, we have to make local advocacy with our RBN partners, and this was key in the mobilization of resources, and then the identification of savings in the budget wherever we can in order to use the budget as best we can for the PPEs, for instance. Okay.
Next question is for you, Clarisse. So great presentation. This is from Hamisu. Do you have an indicator on lead time accuracy being tracked by the wambo.org team?
Yeah, we have several indicators. They're not being tracked by the Wambo team, but by the procurement agent themselves, IDA. So they report back on a quarterly basis, and we monitor ongoing how it's going. The minimum target that we try to achieve is 75% on time in full delivery to countries. And that target is not being met right now because of all the reasons that we just mentioned, unfortunately. So I don't have the score in front of me what it is right now, but that's how we basically keep track of it. And we have a different indicator for the suppliers, whether they're on time, and then looking at the end time to the countries and how it's affected by the supply chain. So we do monitor that.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back to Dr. Sarah. So congratulations on the successful campaign in Madagascar. What reasons do you have for why your malaria cases are increasing? And do you think it is related to the effectiveness of your ITNs or to insufficient access to ITNs during and after mass campaigns?
Oui, merci pour la question.
Thank you very much for the question. We are in the midst of reviewing our strategic plan for 2023, 2022, 2024. And this question will surely be asked and treated in order to modify the strategy to fight against malaria. In most of cases, the districts are, when districts are vulnerable, this is due to climatic factors and to malnutrition. But malaria increased in the last 5 years because of these situation, and also following other epidemics that made the population more vulnerable to vectors and pests, and also through the COVID epidemic as well.
So back to the three of you, Clarisse, Julian, and Chris. Even when orders of different types of ITNs are placed at the same time and yearly, their delivery to countries is not always within the time frame requested. This is true even before COVID-19 for multi-product campaigns. What can procurement partners and national programs do better to ensure that all types of ITNs arrive as per the planning established for the distribution?
Oops. I think it's back to what we were talking about, increased communication from the different parties. So not just Global Fund, but also the procurement agent, the freight forwarder, and the country, to find out as early as possible, when is the campaign? When do you need the different nets? Where exactly do they need to be delivered by the procurement agent? Is it the port, or really down to 200 districts and things like that? The earlier we start planning, the earlier we reserve capacity with the suppliers and place those orders, the earlier we can try to make it work. But at the same time, there's no guarantee in supply chain. There can always be things that happen that are not foreseen and cause delays at any point in the supply chain, whether it's the Global Fund side or at the procurement agent or in the supplier, and even the country can have constraints. So I think that it is really an effort of early planning and coordination and keeping the communication flowing on a regular basis. And the bigger the campaign is, or the more difficult the country is to reach, the more important that becomes. Over.
And I don't have as much familiarity with macro planning as I would have had in the past, but I would advise planning, particularly when the nets are going to be procured by multiple agencies, is almost to plan for being able to plan for the that contribution which has the greatest amount of uncertainty. So rather than trying to drive decisions around where something is already happening, but if you've got one particular supplier of nets that is lagging behind in terms of availability of funding or confirmation of the specifications, then really that's the contribution that's going to bring everything slower to realization. So you have to plan around that greatest uncertainty. Thanks.
Glad, yeah. Thanks both.
All right, thank you. So we'll go back to Dr. Sarah. Le plaidoyer pour la mobilisation des ressources se fait à quel moment après la microplanification, après le dénombrement, et quel est l'impact sur le chronogramme? Vous avez entendu?
Oui.
Sorry, wrong channel. I'm sorry. So advocacy for mobilization of resources has been done after establishing the micro planning. So 3 months 3 months prior to the distribution. So it didn't have an impact on the timeline, but the implementation has been maintained even after the advocacy sessions. Thank you.
Ok, merci. Il y avait juste une autre petite question pour vous.
There was another question for you. Households in Madagascar is forecast is supposed to be how many people? Yes, in average, each household is 4.5 people in Madagascar. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll go back to Clarisse, Chris, and Julian. Given the justified data-driven decision-making, ENTO and EPI, for deployment of new ITNs, will the WHO recommendation make a significant difference for procurement of these nets? For countries with limited data, is there a focus on generating this data, since many of them will be resource limited?
You want to start, Chris, or are you getting up? Okay. You can go ahead if you want to from PMI side, Chris, on this question.
Yeah, I mean, this is a hard question. It's as much an issue of when that data will be available to be able to connect it to the procurement. So I mean, again, this is part of the planning about having the correct intervention available when it's necessary. But we've repeatedly spoken today about the very, very long lead times for net procurement. So if we want to make informed choices as to which type of ITN to put into a country, we need to have that information in a timely fashion, so that the procurement decision can be made. It's hard. We recognize that, but yes, the WHO recommendation will have a significant impact on future procurements, but we need to have that country level data available to make that connection with that product should it happen. Thanks.
Okay, so just on Global Fund to start, and I think Susie will add. So for procurement, it's the same. We are now limiting procurement to just these pilot countries in the New Nets project and the Net Transition Initiative. But once there is a policy, it will open things up for mainstream procurement, but still based on data. We do need that. So I think, Susie, if you want to add to that, go ahead.
Thanks, Clarice. Not much to add to what Clarice said, but in terms of evidence generation, is one of the reasons why we are continually asking that if there is no resources outside of Global Fund support for entomological monitoring to guide decision making, that it should be included in the Global Fund grants. And that's for now. And if there are gaps, reprogramming is always an option, and as well as for future rounds, so that you have this information and can make timely decisions. Thanks.
Thanks, Susie. Thanks, Chris and Clarice. And yeah, I agree with all of that. And from an AMF perspective, we do find that this data is just so rich and so helpful in terms of informing procurement decisions. And I think the one thing that has struck us in the data is that the differences, even from province to province, can be quite significant, which can mean that getting the right type of, the right type of net for one province is different to another. And so this data is extremely valuable. It can also be used a little bit cross-intervention. So if it's collected, it can inform maybe an IRS decision as well as an ITN decision, so you can have multiple benefits. But given how much difference how big the differences can be in terms of resistance profile, resistance mechanisms, having that data to enable a country to target the right type of net for that specific area, I think is really valuable and means that the resources are being used as well as possible.
Great. Thank you very much. So I think we're coming to an end to our discussion time, but thank you very much to all of you for sharing your insights and for your time today. Merci beaucoup aussi à vous, Dr. Sarah. And we're going to take a 10-minute break. So we'll come back in 10 minutes at 53 past the hour. Okay, thank you. So we're going to resume. I hope you were able to take a small break and grab a coffee or a cup of tea. So our next speaker is Luis Ismael from Mozambique's Ministry of Health, working as the Procurement and Supply Chain Manager. He will be sharing Mozambique's innovative waste management efforts. So over to you, Luis.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Susan. Good morning, afternoon, depending on the time of each participant watching this presentation. My presentation is about the innovative waste management efforts made by Mozambique in the last 2019-2020 mass campaign distribution in Tete province. Next slide, please. Okay, I will manage here. Okay, this is outline of my presentation. I will speak a little about for our waste management in country, a challenge with plastics and process and next steps. Last year, we did, in 2020, we did a mass campaign, but in general, Mozambique did 2 major imports of airlines. The main one was of 16.1 million, and second for reinforcement was 1.3 million. Since the large discrepancy we observed between the official data and those verified on the field during the distribution in the first 2 provinces totaled 17.9 nets distributed. As you can see in the map, we use different types of nets. In blue, we use in Cabo Delgado and that we use PBO. You can see in map in blue. And also we use the IG2 type nets in Niassa and Manica provinces, or in gray. And also in Niassa, in 4 districts, we use railguard nets. The remaining provinces, we use the standard bed nets. You can see in yellow in the map. But according to that water that I said before, in macro plan shown that we request 1.8 million of nets to Tete province. You can see a circle in red. And after the enforcement, the total nets distributed in Tete province was 1.9 yeah, the second slide, please. Yes, in this, I would like to bring some history of distribution in our country. After the distribution nets in 2014 and 2015, we found that there was an increase in ownership of nets, but we needed to ensure that community use them. As a result of misuse of plastics by our population, we noted that the community use to handle food, to transport books, and different kind of products, yeah. And as a preventive measure, in 2016-2017, the country tried another approach that consisted of importing nets without plastic bags wrapping, yeah, which result in serious skin irritation problems for distribution at distribution points. Yeah, in a third approach, last campaign, 2019-2020, we did 2 types of approach here because of before COVID and after COVID. And all the distribution that I mentioned before, we did the distribution taking a distribution point. But once the COVID came, we did the distribution point door to door. It's what we did in most of the provinces, door to door. Next slide, please. Mozambique is trying to work with recycling the nets, and what I would like to share with you now is that most of the companies are in Maputo province, city, capital, most of them, and yeah, a few companies in part of the capital of provinces. Yeah, and according to the country policies, we know that the plastic management policies is designed and approved, and it was announced that the prohibition of the use of plastic bags in large commercial establishments and plastic sold to disencourage their use, and in some situation, some companies individually use the biodegradable bags. Approximately 90% of the raw materials were purchased by the companies, and before the stand entered into force, the government has a mission to compensate companies that have acquired them, but their materialization has not yet been realized. Currently, the identification of environmental friendly plastic is carried out from the color, and their classification by color defines the hazard. Next slide, please. Here we have the challenge. For this, we know that all the country we have a lack of companies that can do the incinerator to incinerate the plastic, and what we know that there is a need to map the industry that deal with plastic materials recycling in provincial or regional level. As I said before, most of the company are in capital, in Maputo city, capital of the country. There is a need to encourage communities to know how to separate the waste at the primary level, thus facilitating collecting and recycling. Once the raw or material are produced by the primary industry, a clear instruction we hope that must be stamped on the volumes to transform into utensil for common use, avoiding its use in products that can handle food. Next slide, please. As a first step, the coordination team decide to research, to coordinate. The team started by researching the entity that process plastic in the city. I'm talking especially in depth. Just we look to find which company can handle this, and then we confirm whether they are licensed. After the pre-selection, the team went to the site to learn or to see how they manage the waste, and to have a clear overview how they process also the raw material. Then the companies that best suited to handle this type of waste were selected. It was agreed that this company should be responsible to collect and transport from the main warehouse to the factory. We define the main warehouse that where the company can come to take this wrap to the factory. Next slide, please. In general, the NMC defined that all plastic bags would be incinerated in a health facility in the province. As you know, no health facility has incinerator, but where applicable, we use the incinerator to discard these plastics. Just to mention that eligible material for this purpose consisted only of plastic, since the masks used by the distributor and the team used were full-layer fabric homemade. Specifically in Tete city, having handled a huge quantity amount of waste, about 240,000 plastic bags we collect, the decision was to identify an entity capable of proceeding with the collection and incineration. I would like to explain how we managed to collect also the plastics, and the teams itself went to the house, did the registration and all the procedure that they should do, and after they mobilized the people, they opened the plastic in front of in presence of the beneficiary, just to show that everything is giving them, and they collect back the plastics. Next slide, please. And after the distribution, the teams took these plastics to the team leader, as we call the monitor, to place the wrappers, and they took these wrappers to the team leaders, and then they went back to the field with the full bales, and then these team leaders, once the stock ran out, he ran out to the warehouse to refill also the stock and unload the wrappers. At the end of the campaign, we collect all the wrappers in the same warehouse, or 3 warehouse, and then we asked to the company that we took spoke before, to take all these wrappers to be incinerated. And the environmental objective of this campaign was to reduce the impact of solid waste on the environment, and we believe we had fulfilled this experiment. Next slide, please. For next step, we believe that we should continue mapping and the areas that can be in condition to recycle materials, and we should review also the collection and recycle option throughout the country. As you can see, you saw in the map, the country is huge, and we need to do that. And also we need to overall cost saving for NMCP also said. It is recommended to sign a memorandum where the parties will be in a situation of mutual gain, win-win. The NMCP provides raw material by eliminating the plastic from their warehouse, and the companies obtain them at zero cost, thus ensure the sustainability of the process. In the right, in the slide at the right, you can see the picture how we organize the wrap materials. And that's all what I would like to present to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luis. That was very interesting, and thanks for sharing some of those challenges around waste. I don't think that's unique either to Mozambique, but very interesting to learn about your innovations around hiring that private recycling company. So before we move to the next presentation, I just want to remind everyone to please continue putting in your questions into the chat so we can address those and discuss that during the discussion time. So next, I'd like to invite Levi Henney, who is the Deputy Program Manager for Surveillance, Monitoring and Evaluation from Liberia's NMCP. And he will be presenting on how they have addressed COVID-19 related rumors.
So thank you very much. My name is Mr. D. Levi Henney, the Deputy Program Manager for Surveillance, Monitoring, Evaluation at the National Malaria Control Program. I'll be sharing Liberia experience on addressing COVID-19 related rumors during RTS campaign, challenges and recommendations. So Liberia is the oldest West African country comprising of 5 regions. We have 15 counties and 93 health districts. So malaria is endemic in Liberia with continuous transmission throughout the year. And our entire population of approximately 5 million people are at risk. And malaria accounts for 34% and 48% of all outpatient cases and inpatient cases, respectively. Our dominant species is Plasmodium falciparum, which is 95%. And we have a climate that is very favorable to mosquito breeding. So since 2008, the National Malaria Control Program has distributed millions of nets through routine and mass campaign. So we actually started our nationwide distribution in 2015. We adopted the distribution every 3 years. And that was followed by the 2018 distribution where we distributed 2.4 million nets. Most recently, we had a campaign last year and we distributed more than 2 million nets that were funded by PMI and Global Funds. And we got technical support from the RBN community, including AMP. So our campaign strategy has been multiple strategies because of our theory. We have household registration using door-to-door all over the country. And in terms of distribution, we have door-to-door in urban areas. And then we have fixed site distribution in rural areas. And we were able to divide the counties. We have 15 counties. And Monrovia serve as the urban, and the rest of the 14 counties serve as rural. So we also use vouchers to distribute nets. We use a voucher for registration in rural areas, while in urban areas, we did not issue voucher. So our campaign was guided with a plan of action and elaborate COVID-19 session addressing prevention and control. So we started a campaign, and basically, normally with a risk of COVID, a resurgence of COVID in the country. However, we did not know that there would be myths and other issues affecting the campaign. So the campaign started in June, and by early July, we started receiving reports from the counties concerning, so we did a rapid assessment, and we found out that 11 out of the 15 counties actually responded to our assessment. And they completed the assessment template. And the types of rumors that we identified were that number one, the nets were harmful, and they contain poison, and they could kill people, And the nets had chemical on them that could kill people or reduce the population. And at the time we had this COVID-19 at the peak. The second type of rumors we identified was rumors of intent to kill, to harm. It was racial rumors, looking at Black people never died during the COVID, so the white people wanted to kill the Black people and all of that. The second instance was that the RTNs were brought in country to kill a larger population, particularly in River G County, which will happen when anybody sleeps under the nets. So all of these different types of rumors, we managed to categorize them. Another rumors we got was rumors linking the RTNs to COVID-19. The MOH placed COVID virus in the nets. The Ministry of Health is distributing nets to increase the number of COVID cases. The nets contain or are infected with COVID, and our health workers are placing COVID virus in nets. And other types of rumors were associated with, or the nets are manufactured under the sea. So all of these things were the things that were impacting the distribution. So the spread of the rumors vary from county to county. Counties most affected entirely were counties like Sino, Grenku, and Moserado. Moserado rumors cut across all the 7 districts. Sino, the rumors were circulating within the 356 communities across the 10 districts. In Grenku, rumors were circulating across the entire county. Counties with 50% spread, we have Grenji there. We have 50% spread because they have 3 districts and we only had rumors in 3 districts. In Maryland, rumors circulated within 3 of the 6 districts. In Nimba, we have 2 out of 6 had rumors. And in River G, rumors limited to 3 out of 6 districts. In Grand Bassa, rumors were gathered from 3 out of 8 districts. And in Lofa, the rumors were limited to 1 or 2 communities only. So counties with no rumors include Bomi and Babulu. So the impact of the rumors impacted us in the sense that we had delays in the distribution. People were not willing to go for the nets. Also were reluctant to use their nets or not using the nets correctly. In River G, completed distribution before the rumors started spreading. However, it led to some people want to sleep under the nets. Also using anti-NS for purpose other than sleeping. We observed that newly received nets were being used as ropes for their farms. Also not properly maintaining the nets. The fact that the rumors have already spread, so people started misbehaving with the nets. And we started having different issues coming up in terms of misuse. So what did we do? We planned SBCC activities across 4 counties. The other 10 counties had the following pending SBCC activities that could be used to respond to the rumors. So we have coordination meetings, we had airing of RTNS jungles, radio talk shows, community engagement meetings, advocacy meetings, facilities, health talks, the use of community health workers, and press conferences were held across the country. For immediate response, the county health teams and partners began to react to the rumors based on context in each county. Caution was placed on mode of response to avoid further spread of the rumors. Counties that were entirely affected by rumors, a county-wide campaign to counter the rumors were conducted. Counties where rumors affected certain districts, the interventions targeted only affected districts to reduce the risk of rumors spilling to other districts. Counter interventions included radio talk shows, county mobilization through local leaderships, announcements aimed at informing the public about the nets. The communication technical working group then began to plan and strategize on mechanisms to counter the rumors. So first we had community channels identified. These were partly identified through the rapid assessment, and resident partners in affected counties began to immediately intervene in collaboration with the county health teams. And then we developed a 9-month plan, post-campaign SBC plan of action aimed at optimizing net ownership, use, and maintenance. That plan was developed and costed. Now, we also, following the communication channels, we had community engagement meetings with traditional leaders, community health workers, community focus group discussions, messaging through talk shows, publicity awareness using PA systems, and mass media. So with that, only 4 counties have already completed planned BCC activities because we have BCC activities planned already with the campaign. And the 10 other counties had the following pending activities that could be used to respond to the rumors. So we have coordination meetings, we have airing of RTNS jingles, we have radio talk shows, county engagement meetings, advocacy meetings, facility health talks, the use of community workers, and we also have press conferences. So for immediate response, counties that have partners have begun to react to the rumors based on their context, and caution was placed on the mode of response to avoid further spread. Counties that were entirely affected by rumors, a county-wide campaign was held to counter the rumors. Counties where rumors were affected certain areas, the interventions targeted only the affected areas. We also have radio talk show. Okay, Jessica, yes. What did we do? That's what I'm explaining. So for the long-term cluster plan, the NNCP and partners developed a cluster plan that was dedicated to scaling up nest ownership and use and care for 9 months. The roles and responsibilities were clearly defined between county health teams and partners. However, we could not source funding for that plan. 12 counties have funding for ongoing BCC activities, and 3 other counties rely on national broadcasters. Our challenges have been COVID rumors surfaced during the RTNS distribution. And this may be because the RTNS occurred, the distribution occurred during Liberia's third wave of COVID infections. Rumors management plan was not finalized and adopted as part of the communication POA. Delay in implementation of SBCC activities. We had delays in the disbursement of funds for SBCC activities for the entire campaign. Delay in signing of the MOU. We had MOU between plan and the county health teams, and that MOU was delayed. Delay in conducting BCC activities also impacted the rumors. Late dissemination of print materials and audio messages impacted that. We had a slow start of the campaign because this time around we had a very difficult issues that affected the campaign. Then we also had as a challenge the lack of funding to implement the long-term plan. So our recommendations is that anti-rumors, as we should also accept anti-rumors when we are planning and implementing campaigns, meaning that we need to develop and adopt rumor management plan as part of the communication plan of action. There's no need to have a separate rumor management plan because sometimes it doesn't get financed because resources are scarce. Assess all risks related to campaign planning and implementation to avoid surprises. Avoid further circulation of rumors. Do not mention or address rumors in public or in areas where they are not occurring. Engage and involve local stakeholders before and during the RTNS mass distribution. Modify talking points based on any information. A talking point should help ensure consistency in the key messages among the stakeholders. And you should ensure talking points are in line with ongoing BCC messages. Testimonials should be used in communities to motivate peers through experience sharing. And also we need to disseminate a press release from influential personality. That's some of the things that we did. Or we want to acknowledge the below listed partners And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Levi. That was very interesting. And I really like how you categorize the rumors, including by different districts. And clearly rumors can have really detrimental impacts on the use of net, but I'm glad that you were able to address these rumors via your social behavior plan. And thank you very much for also sharing your recommendations with us. So we're now going to move to the discussion. If I could ask Luis, if your bandwidth allows, if you can come back on video. Thank you very much. So our first question is to you, Luis.
Yes.
Why did Mozambique change from unpacked nets to packaged nets for campaigns? And what were the challenges faced with the unpacked nets beyond skin irritation that could be solved through use of gloves by people handling them?
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. This is an interesting question. Yes, we changed the from package is to unpackage first, because we know that after our mass campaign, as I explained, a huge quantity of plastic were left in the site, in the distribution point. And also, as I explained, we know that many children and in our community use the plastic to handle food and cassava and other things, just to avoid this kind of, because this plastic have any insecticide and it's not good for our health. We decide to change to again to packaging, to plastic for in nets. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question.
Yes, I think you did. Thank you very much. The next question is for you, Levi. Were the rumors identified generated specifically to COVID-19 pandemic situation, or are these long-standing concerns that the NMCP has had to confront in the past?
Yes, thank you very much. Also, please the response in the chat box if you want to read it, but I can explain that we had standing issues with net use already. There was some use of nets that we've been cataloging as a program, but it was not very high in terms of skill. However, the fact that we already discussed that we are bringing very different nets, and with the ongoing COVID-19, so it spread apprehension among the population that why this time you are bringing new nets, and how are these nets going to be different? So basically, there were standing issues, and then they were heightened by COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we'll try and address the questions verbally, if that's okay with you. So next question is to Luis. Why were, excuse me, why were PPEs not part of the waste management? And how was PPE waste managed?
Yes, as I said, the PPE was not part of this experiment, because, as you know, as you know, I don't know, the PPE, we used the homemade mask with cloth, not as it was a homemade product, and we didn't know. We didn't want to mix plastics with this kind of mask. That was the reason that we only take the plastics to be transformed, recycled. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Levi, back to you. And let me know if you've already addressed this in the chat, but of the different channels used to address the rumors, which did you think were most effective? Were any of the were any of the channels cost efficient enough to be activated before, during, or after the next campaign?
Yes, we have, it depends on where you want to speak from, because each county had their own challenges. And in some counties, like in Nimba, the county health officer got involved, the county health officer herself got involved. And being a doctor for the county, a lot of people believed in her and they were able to listen to her. In other places, we use traditional chiefs and other influencers to encourage the community members to go back to the campaign and start using the nets. Those who did not get the nets, they asked them to go back to get the nets. So we use multiple channels and it worked from county to county. So it wasn't one means solving the problem. We had different channels based on the context at the time.
Okay, thank you. Luis, back to you.
Yes.
Did the company only collect specific waste, such as the bale packaging, or all the waste generated during the campaign, such as paper, bale straps, etc.?
Not. The answer is true. Is straightforward. Only plastic from the nets. Yeah, from bales. Not. We didn't cover other PPA.
Okay, great. So Levi, back to you. Was there any noticeable effect in terms of ITN coverage or utilization for the counties that did not get funding for SBCC? I am assuming countries that did not receive SBCC funding did not implement a comprehensive communication to address the rumors associated with COVID-19.
Yes, we had those challenges, particularly in Sino. Sino had delayed delivery of nets, coupled with the myth. And so they also did not start their BCC campaign on time. So there were particular issues in Sino as a result of all of these challenges. Elsewhere in Bapulu, where we did not have the myth, they didn't report any myth, but they were delayed in receiving the nets because of bad road conditions and other climatical situations. So yes, the different contests play in, and we have very long lead times in people receiving the nets, coupled with the myth that were going on.
Okay, thank you. So the next question back to Luis. We heard that empty acrylic bottles were also recycled in countries or maybe counties in Mozambique. Did you use the same recycling company for the ITN plastic?
Yes, this is a space that we are trying to use. One of the question was related to that, because we have an agreement with the Minister of Agriculture. How can we proceed? And we would like to take this experience that we are doing with the Minister of Environment, just to collect all the plastics for the company. But when we talk about these plastics for that we use in IRS for acrylic, for example, we do ourselves the first cleaning. We clean the bottles at the sites, and then we found the company that should collect all them in the entire country to one place in Maputo. But we are not talking about a huge quantity of bottles. But when we talk about the bed nets, yeah, the story is different. We need to have another approach to recycle in each place, because even the distribution take place in different periods.
Okay, thank you. So we have a bunch of more questions in the chat that I'll go through as well, but if you want to raise your hand at any point of time and come off mute and ask your questions, please do so. Otherwise, the next question, sorry, is back to you, Levi. With the large number of different communication channels used, how did you ensure consistency in the messages that were disseminated? And how was message diffusion monitored?
Okay, yes, this is a very good question. We had multiple channels, but we have consistency in terms of the messages. all of our messages were predetermined and they were all or tested before we had in the public. So what we did not create new messages as a result of the myth. We reinforced the messages that we already had running. And in urban areas, of course, the radio messages did well. Radio was one of the most effective means of communication. In rural areas, in some semi-urban areas, also has similar effect. But the town criers were one of the most successful channels in rural areas because they were going around announcing day and night, every morning and every evening, announcing the next distribution, and their messages were consistent. So the different areas had different effect on the channels that we use, and the most visible ones in the rural areas, which is largely where the next distribution took place, was the rural area, and the town criers and the traditional leaders were very effective.
Thank you. It's good to know. Luis, back to you.
Yes.
Waste management is not easy, and plastic on individual bags creates many challenges. So there's a question for planning. Did it take much time to find your private sector partners? And how much time would you allocate to finding your private sector partners and getting them to participate?
Thank you, Suzanne. But for this answer, I will ask Molly to translate. I will, speaking in Portuguese slowly, because I need to elaborate the answer. É assim, na verdade, antes de proceder com a escolha da empresa, nós fizemos uma busca ativa de quais as empresas que operam em cada local. Como estivéssemos a trabalhar apenas em Tete, nós só fizemos a busca na cidade de Tete. Molly?
So they were doing, they started out with searching for all of the different places that could do recycling specifically in each area. And as they were only working in Tet province, they were just looking in Tet province.
Não foi muito difícil identificar as empresas, porque existem muitas empresas que transformam o plástico, mas nós procuramos empresas licenciadas que cumprem com os requisitos de defesa contra o ambiente.
It wasn't difficult to find a lot of companies that did this. There were a lot that transform plastics, but they wanted specifically for companies that are licensed to be able to do that transformation.
And I believe that I answered the question.
Great. Thank you. And your English is very good. So
sometimes we need some help.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. So Levi, the next question is for you. And I think you addressed this a little bit in your presentation. Have you developed a lessons learned document to feed into the development of the next campaign and the engagement of communities well in advance?
We didn't develop in some kind of document, but we wrote in our reports internally, and we need to do the same as we did in that province. As I said, it's difficult to say that we will do in all country, because some city have those kind of industries, but other doesn't have anything. And we should find a way to collect all the waste management and to send to another place where the industry exists.
Okay, thank you. And Levi, I have the same question for you as well. Let me know if you would like me to repeat it.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the question for you is, have you developed a lessons learned document to feed into the development of the next campaign and the engagement of communities well in advance?
Yes, we are planning our post-campaign review meeting. Are supposed to finalize all of the arrangements that we are making for the next campaign. However, our BCC cluster is still working They are still meeting weekly to discuss issues. And thankfully, we have PMI supporting BCC activities in 13 counties where they have representatives in those counties. And all of these issues are being mitigated by the day. So we are still working beyond the campaign. And hopefully, we will be able to document all of that at the end of the review meeting. And then we'll use that as a planning for the next campaign.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question is back to you, Luis. Was the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Environment consulted for lessons learned in the management of the used pesticide containers or packaging used in the agricultural sector?
Madam Molly,
Posso fazer a tradução? Eles estão a querer saber se o Ministério de Agricultura ou de Meio Ambiente estava consultado para saber o que eles fazem em termos de plásticos que são usados na agricultura, em termos de reciclagem.
Okay. Eu não estaria em condições mesmo de poder responder esta questão assim globalmente, mas para dizer que em relação ao plástico usado na campanha da IRS, nós envolvemos o Ministério do Ambiente. Então eles é que são os responsáveis, mas a importação do inseticida, nós envolvemos o Ministério da Agricultura, onde nós obtemos os waivers, as devidas autorizações, e pronto, de modo a não criar conflito com o próprio Ministério da Agricultura. Para dizer que nós envolvemos as duas instituições, o Ministério da Agricultura e do Ambiente, quando se trata exatamente de IRS, de inseticidas, mas já no que concerne a redes mosquiteiras, porque trabalhamos apenas com plástico, nós só envolvemos o Ministério do Ambiente. Aliás, tencionamos envolver melhor o Ministério do Ambiente no futuro. A semelhança do que nós já fizemos para
eu acho que a questão era também sobre eles, o que eles fazem no meio ambiente, em termos de reciclagem, com outros produtos, não sei, ok.
Não sei dizer mesmo.
Yeah, so they did involve the Ministry of Agriculture and the Environment, consulted them specifically, for these bed nets. There's also consulted for IRS, but it is more in terms of the processes that they need to go through, not really in terms of lessons learned from other products that they oversee and recycle.
Okay, thank you very much. It could be also very interesting to learn more about that in terms of how you've worked with the different ministries, but maybe in a separate discussion, so thank you. So Levi, we have a question for you. Did you involve the community in mitigating these rumors? That maybe a suggestion that this could be an effective channel.
Of course, yes. We use the traditional chiefs, like I said in the presentation, and we use every means possible to get people going for the nets. So the community was involved. The fact that the town crier is only working for the town chief, so there was a greater involvement of the community in every aspect of the campaign.
Okay, thank you. It's good to hear. Luis, back to you. Do you know what will be done with the plastic bags? What will they be made into? And can this be rolled out to the country, throughout the country, excuse me?
Thank you. This is an interesting question. That is our deal now, as presented in my, as I said in my presentation. We need, because the companies produce raw material, and we need to be sure that they will send this material to specific, to produce specific materials. We hope that these materials should be used only to produce tables and chairs, and or specific material for malaria program, because sometimes we need basin or plates to put food for mosquitoes and other kinds of things that we do in insectarius. I don't know if I can say insectarius in English. Molly, insectario mesmo?
Yeah, insectary.
Insectary, yes, yeah, but we do that. But we need to have an agreement with the company that produce materials. First of all, the raw material should have a stamp on them that we should tell them that use these materials on to produce that kind of materials. This is our challenge in the future.
All right, thank you. So another question for you, Luis. Is there a process for the government, or maybe with the donors, to support the creation of the recycling industry for all plastic?
Yeah, I don't know. As I said, when I start presenting, there are some, the policy is done, but to implement is another issue. We believe that in future, we will have all the things in place to do as it should be done.
Okay, all right, thank you. So another one on the recycling. Who is paying for the cost of recycling IRS plastic bottles, old nets or plastic covers, and is the approach sustainable?
Yes, as I explained also in this presentation, our approach is the type of win-win. The companies need materials, and we need to leave this material from our side. And because this company have many problems to find the raw materials, they collect from the West, but once we work with the plastic, we collect and we put in the same place. It's easy to them to go there and take back to their place. We didn't pay anything. The company arranged the trucks and move to the place and take the plastic back to them without any problem. We can sustain this in this way. We didn't need to pay anyone, and the company also don't need to pay. It's a win-win.
Okay, great, thank you. Maybe one last question for you as well, is what have you done with the plastics that were not recycled, and who provided funding for this?
Pardon, can you come again with the question?
Yeah, so sorry, the question is in French, so I'm trying to direct translate, but it's what have you done with the plastics that were not recycled, and who provided funds for this?
Yeah, no one. Yeah, for those places that we didn't recycle, we leave the plastic with at the warehouse, and we hope that one day we will collect them. As I explained, we did this experiment only in that city, but at the district level down at the community, we collect and we place all these materials in the warehouse. And we hope that in this agreement that we will sign with the company that we will look for, we will collect all the material to be recycled.
Okay, all right, thank you. I do see Anita, you have your hand raised, so we'll take your question as well.
Okay, thank you, Susan, for the opportunity. I just wanted to, this is for both of them, any one of them can answer. Rather, I was late, so probably you must have discussed that. What I wanted to know about the trainings prior to the bednet distributions. How are the training conducted in the COVID context? How are they conducted? Was this, we had the number reduced, or was any training on? How was the training done? Thank you, over.
Okay, thank you. In Liberia, we have a threshold set for each training. So we had 20 persons per session for each training. So what we did, each county presented a number of trainings, and each of that whole number was broken down into a session. of 20. So we had a very elaborate COVID-19 session that had a step-by-step approach to every aspect of the campaign, from the infection prevention and control to the number of people even riding vehicles. So this time around, we had a very elaborate expenditure on logistics as well, because when you do that, it has a very big impact on logistics and other resources. Over.
Great, thank you. Luis, did you want to add anything?
From my side, it was a pleasure. I want to say, yeah, a very thank you to this meeting. Yeah, it was interesting. It was my first time. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it well.
Okay, thank you. So did we. Thank you so much for sharing all your lessons learned. That was very interesting. And thank you also to you, Levi, for joining us and sharing. So we're going to, again, take a 10-minute break. And I think we'll come back at 02 past the hour, 2 minutes past the hour. Okay, so I think we're going to resume. So I'm now going to hand over to Jessica Rockwood, who is the president of International Public Health Advisors, and she will be sharing a multi-country review and adaptations and potential cost drivers for COVID-19 adapted campaigns. So over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Suzanne. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. As Suzanne said, my name is Jessica Rockwood. I'm with International Public Health Advisors and have been a part of the AMP family since it began. I was lucky enough to be a part of the development of a number of different documents as COVID came upon us. So unlike all the other presenters, I'm actually going to be presenting on what happened right after COVID hit, what countries had to really undertake and adapt to in order to facilitate the implementation of their ITN campaigns. So just to be clear, this is not really a costing analysis, but a general trends approach that affects costs. Fati, who is will be presenting from NMEP Nigeria, will present on some costs in their campaign, and then we are developing some in Uganda. I would like to thank the Gates Foundation and the Global Fund for funding this effort. So just to say, what you're going to be hearing also is not information on every country that put together or implemented a 2020 campaign. We are basically reporting on the early the countries that were implementing a campaign at the beginning of the pandemic. Those were Benin, Central African Republic, Ethiopia, Guinea-Bissau, South Sudan, Chad, Togo, and Uganda. So these are very, very focused and are really covering the main areas of an ITN campaign. So being coordination, procurement, micro planning, macro planning, logistics training, SBC data collection. Of course, supervision and monitoring, household registration, ITN distribution, and post-distribution. So when it comes to coordination, I have to say, it was amazing to speak with countries and talk to the donors and implementing partners, and really got the sense that there was incredible support and flexibility towards the campaign at highest levels, coming down from WHO, encouraging national governments to move forward despite COVID-19 concerns, but also, as I said, from the international local partners, including donors, etc. You'll see that I have in this presentation some quotes which I thought were pretty inspiring. that we took from the case studies, and just to say that all of the case studies are available on the AMP website. I'm sure someone will put that in the chat later. So from CHAD, they felt the successful campaign was the outcome of timely decision-making. And as we all know, in the context of COVID, when things were going really crazy in the beginning, that was sometimes a Herculean effort. And the result of a solid coordination and communication on the part of NMCP through all different channels, such as teleconferences, meetings, exchange of emails, and meetings with technical committees. And then, of course, as I said before, good cooperation with partners such as the Global Fund, WHO, RBM, and AMP. When it comes to procurement, I'm not going to tell you anything you already don't know. We had a wonderful presentation from our partners today, but generally the trend was additional budget was required to procure commodities for PPE. That's clear. Many countries experienced delays in shipments. We've heard that before, but in the early days, there were movement restrictions and global supply chain disruptions, more so probably than we're experiencing now. And where local procurement was approved to ensure timely distribution, we often found that those prices were inflated. From Benin's point of view, there were major implications as none of the PPE was budgeted for at the outset of the campaign. Masks were procured locally and inflated costs were noted from suppliers given a high period of demand and low supply. And so we saw this in a number of countries. For macro planning, it was interesting that generally, they were completed prior to the declaration of COVID-19, and countries updated their main documents to reflect COVID-19 prevention measures. As you can see from CAR, the micro planning documents were reviewed. The plan of action included COVID-19 context, PPE to be used, health screening of personnel during the training, which was required, reduction in the number of working days, which we will see also as from the question in Sierra Leone earlier, the number of training days were reduced, but really to minimize exposure of personnel and formulation of key messages adapted to the context of COVID-19. For micro planning, again, workshops were adapted, fewer participants, more workshops. This was across the board, and I still think it continues now. I still think that there's some concern around having too many people in a confined space. In some cases where reliable data from previous microplanning activities were used, and so that would be coming from measles campaigns or IRS campaigns, but really utilizing that data to minimize infection or to ensure infection control. For the Central African Republic, they noted that the micro planning budget and additional costs related to COVID-19 were equipment coordination activities at central level, managing cost of the partner NGOs, and World Vision support costs in the framework of a zero cash policy approach, which many countries undertook. These were presented to the Global Fund and approval obtained to cover all costs in view of the country's fragility and financial context, as well as the burden of malaria and the need to ensure ITNs reached households. I think that was generally the approach most countries took. They really needed and wanted to make sure that countries or that households and communities actually had malaria prevention commodities. For logistics, most countries luckily had already received their nets. They were adapted due to the restrictions on movement, as we've said before, and the number of people that were allowed to gather. For example, for offloading and the requirement to use PPE. In most cases, I would say the logistics were adjusted. And in most countries, and you'll hear more from Nigeria, if they were from fixed site to if the change was from a fixed site to single phase door to door, the prepositioning of ITNs was adapted, as was the last mile transportation to door teams that was included in the campaign budget. Guinea-Bissau, that's a nice picture of their distribution on the left. Another challenge for them related to emergency measures was the restriction that no more than 4 people were allowed to unload the ITNs from containers. This was solved by extending warehousing hours, including weekends, and allowing more shifts to make up lost time. But of course, that also has implications on costing. For training, as we said, they were shortened with fewer participants, but more sessions were added, which would of course have budget implications for if they were inside renting additional days of rooms. They were adapted to include infection prevention and the effect on campaign implementation and timelines. And in almost all cases, I have to commend countries. Participants were using PPE and were maintaining physical distance. Many were held outside, but if they had to be held inside, hand washing facilities were provided and the rooms were always disinfected. And of course, as it relates to quality, additional supporting materials and SOPs were developed. Togo's experience showed that conducting multiple parallel training sessions, such as in schools, can help reduce the number of days required to train large numbers of campaign actors, but requires a greater number of trainers, as I noted. For SBC, most countries, I would say all the countries that I reviewed, integrated their messaging, giving information on malaria, the use of nets, and the prevention of COVID-19. You can see the SBC taking place. This picture, as I recall, is from Uganda, where they really were trying to move a massive number of nets and really had to integrate messages through different means and adaptations. As noted there, this also included the changes to the campaigns and what those adaptations were. They were generally, we heard earlier from Levi, disseminated via town criers, virtual meetings, megaphones, vehicles with loudspeakers, and the like. Some of that was normal, some of it was an adaptation. From Ethiopia, they were modified, as you see in the quote, to adapt to the COVID contact by discouraging gathering of large people at marketplaces and road shows. The time taken to educate household members at distribution sites was also reduced. And then, of course, there was joint social mobilization across areas. Data collection definitely varied. I think Fatih will also speak to this a bit in her presentations. Some countries continued using previous paper-based systems simply because the budgets wouldn't allow a change, and daily review meetings and validation of data. Some reported the plan change to digital contributed to reducing the risk of infection via paper-based tools. I think, as we all know, in those times of the beginning of COVID, we weren't sure how it was really being transmitted. So really adapting the paper-based tools was part of the process. For Ethiopia, again, one of their challenges on data collection was the shortage of funds for airtime to collect the data using text and voice messages. And communication fees, being airtime credits, were only made available for national level campaign coordinators. And their message being that since that challenge could have an impact on data collection and may affect quality of collected data, a lesson learned is adequate funding should be allocated for airtime communications in the future campaigns. For supervision and monitoring, I mean, as Togo notes, strengthening supervision, especially local supervision, is one of the key to successes. I think, you know, that is always the case, but I think in COVID times that was even more insightful. Given the restrictive measures related to COVID-19, supervision from higher levels may not be fully effective. Reinforced local supervision overcomes these shortcomings. And I think that is, for me, a lesson learned for anyone looking at continuing to implement within the COVID context. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is from Ethiopia, but you can see their efforts to distribute and make sure people had nets and to really comply with physical distancing within registration and distribution. So in many countries, as I said, a door-to-door strategy was adopted, either with 2 visits, one for registration and one for distribution, or one specifically that combine registration and distribution. In some cases, fixed site distribution remained, but with infection prevention measures in place and crowd control. And that included, in some countries, some security as far as that was concerned. When it comes to budget and cost, in Chad, it was revised and amended to include cost of acquisition of PPE and other health products, and to take into account the changes in registration and distribution activities to a single phase door-to-door. So I think I've got 2 more slides. I think I'm on time. For post-distribution, they were affected by restrictions. I don't think anyone is surprised by that. Most countries held review meetings, but these were limited. Post-distribution communication activities were also limited, and waste management planning was revised, especially with the need to manage the used PPE. Uganda notes the distribution team collected all waste generated daily, including waste from disposable PPE. The waste was transported back to sub-county stores for proper disposal. And I think, as Uganda, their case study that this was taken from was only on their first 2 waves. They changed policies and used lessons learned as they went through. I think a lot of countries on, as Luis from Mozambique noted today, waste is becoming a big issue, but especially in the COVID context. So just to bring you back around to the highlights, again, I'd like to, first of all, I'd like to thank Viv Seabright for her help and Marcy Erskine for working with me to put all of this information together. But most importantly, I'd like to applaud countries who adapted their campaigns and distributed their ITNs in challenging environments during the COVID context. As you see here, and as I said earlier, those are the countries that are in blue that will inform this work that is just being completed and will be posted. Only minor disruptions were observed, as I said, due to the strong coordination and flexibility of national governments and their partners in adapting budgets and timelines and facilitating procurement of PPE and other commodities. So overall, I would just say it's pretty amazing that once we were in the middle of, or in the beginning of COVID-19, countries still managed to distribute over 160 million nets, accounting for 73.9% of the planned ITNs. So amazing work to support and ensure that malaria cases did not go through the roof as expected. So I'd like to thank you all very much and happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. That was very interesting indeed, and sharing all these adaptations to COVID-19. And I agree, countries have done a tremendous job in adapting to COVID-19 and this pandemic. So just as a reminder to please continue to post your questions and input your questions into the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. And we'll now move to our next presenter from Nigeria's National Elimination Program, Fatima Ali, who is the ITN campaign focal point, and she will be discussing Nigeria's qualitative process evaluation and quantitative analysis of end process results for 5 COVID-19 adapted campaigns. Fatima?
Thank you very much. All right, I'll be taking us through the end process evaluation, the quantitative analysis that was done last year. Next slide. All right, and end process monitoring is usually done by independent monitors. Is a standard practice in all ITN campaigns in Nigeria. And well, the independent monitors are called, we also call them campaign monitoring team. And the purpose is to provide data for key indicators to allow for programmatic adjustments such as mop-up where needed. So this evaluation covered the period of 2017 to 2020, where the NMEP undertook household sampling efforts, LQS, in 16 states in the country, targeting about 49,000 households. So availability of end process data for ITN campaigns prior to and during COVID-19 provided an opportunity to assess whether campaign outcomes were affected by the modifications done due to modifications done to the strategies and to the strategy and minimizing the risk of COVID-19 comparison. So it's a comparison between before COVID and during COVID-19. Next slide, please. So the objective is to assess whether campaign outcomes were affected by the adaptations and also to successfully quantify in preventing COVID-19 transmission and in achieving public health intervention goals. So also want to find out if any of these adaptations can be retained going forward post COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So the methodology was quantitative analysis of end process data from 4 campaigns in 2020 and end process data for campaigns that took place from 2017 to 2019. Excel worksheets were collated into a single spreadsheet and imported into Starter version 17 for data cleaning and analysis. So data analyzed include administrative ITN campaign data from the 17 states, LQS summary data from the local government, 16 state campaigns in 2017 and 2020. Then LQS data for households in 2 state campaigns, that's Taraba and Kaduna State, for their 2019 campaigns. Next slide. So the results show that over 95% of the ITN distributed compared to net cards issued to the households, except for the 2017. The average ratio of ITN received by households was 2:8:1. Both hanging and use increased between 2018 and 2020 as compared to 2017. ITN use in children under 5 was 76% during the COVID-19 period, that's 2020, compared to 74% and 75% in 2018 and 2019 respectively. So that shows the change was not that significant, but at least during the COVID-19 pandemic period, we had an increase. Non-campaign nets were 25% of the nets in the household reported in 3 campaigns with data in 2019 to 2020. non-campaign nets were 27% of nets reported to be hanging during the previous night as of when the sampling was done. Next slide, please. So this just shows a representation of the states that were sampled and in terms of percentage of ITN use among children under 5. So with a range of 0 to 70 and up to 90 to 100. Data for Kwara and Adamawa 2017 campaigns are not shown here actually. Next slide, please. So the conclusion, end process data did not allow for conclusions to be drawn about whether prevention of COVID-19 transmission was successful from the quantitative perspective. ITN indicators were comparable to those from ITN prior to the pandemic across all the states. And then adaptations for both the Global Fund and the PMI funded states were equally successful in achieving the campaign objectives in terms of ITN access. Next slide. All right, then going into the qualitative analysis. Next slide, please. All right, so the goal was to assess ITN mass distribution strategy in the context of COVID-19. This objective 1, assess campaign modifications and identify modification adaptations in the context of COVID-19, including use of electronic versus paper-based data collection to identify the strengths, challenges, outcomes, and then of course the cost implications and the different approaches, and to be able to come up with recommendations that can be adapted in future activities. Objective 2 is to document experiences and campaign outcomes for integration of ITN distribution with SMC, seasonal malaria chemotherapy, to identify strengths, challenges, and outcomes, and cost, of course, and be able to develop recommendations for future activities. Target states were Adamawa, Benue, Kwara, Osun, and Zamfara states, and that represents about 15 million ITNs distributed to about 27 million people. Next slide, please. Okay, the methodology included a document review of the adaptations done at the state and at the global level, the core planning documents and the state mass campaign, the individual state reports, and then also the coordination of the evaluation team to ensure alignment on process and tools, development of pre-testing and finalization of tools, that's the KII and the OQ, and the qualitative code book and the report format. Then conducted the key KII and deployed the OQs. Then data analysis, and then finally the report writing. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right. Thank you. So this table, shows the different states and the different types of campaign and how unique each state was. In terms of the type of campaign, whether it was integrated, Zamfara state had SMC and ITN integration, whereas all the other states had just ITN campaign. Then the phases, some did 2 phases and some did single. 2 phases mean that the household mobilization door-to-door was done, and then distribution was done at a fixed distribution point. That's for Zamfara and Benue, while Osun, Kwara, and Adamawa did the single phases door-to-door, that's simultaneous registration of the household and the issuing of the nets. As for the type of nets, for Zamfara and Benue, it was the standard, and then we had the multi-products in Osun and Kwara states, and then Adamawa had just the PBO. Again, for Zamfara Benue, they carried out the paper-based campaign, whereas the other state did digital. We had some of them were complex operating environment. Zamfara, because of the security situation of Banding 3, Osun campaign coincided with the NSAS protest that took place, and then same for Adamawa State as well. Next slide. So the respondents, if you can see, it covers across the different levels from the national down to the state, LG and ward, and then the implementing partners and PMI as well. So in total, 76 people were involved in this evaluation, and their responsibilities varied from logistics, micro-planning, training, coordination, SBC, and health education. Next slide. So the main recommendations that came out from this evaluation is that future state engagement in future adaptations, because most of the planning and adaptations that were done was at the national level. So it would be good to involve the state level stakeholders to be part of future adaptations. Consider exploring different types of COVID-19 adaptations. So urban versus rural. So most of our states in Nigeria have the urban and the rural areas. So it would be good to explore the differences there. Ensure availability of recommended PPE supplies in sufficient quantity. Ensure that authorities are equipped with adequate resources to accommodate PPE and ITM related waste. So about 17% of respondents did not receive waste collection bags. So that's a significant number. Next slide, please. So encourage the use of single phase door-to-door distribution. This is to minimize contact between the campaign personnel and the household, and this allows avoidance of crowded distribution points. Also, this allowed for better coverage because it's door-to-door, so the nets are being carried to the houses, and that made it easier for the beneficiaries. However, where fixed distribution points are used, increase the number of distribution points to avoid crowding. Collaborate closely with other stakeholders to create more awareness of COVID-19 through community dialogue, especially on the use of face masks. Working closely with local and state authorities, and increase the number of monitors to ensure enforcement of the COVID-19 protocol. Next slide, please. So utilization of more virtual meetings and trainings. So a few of the states were able to do some of their trainings virtually. Like for example, in Adamawa, they're able to do the micro planning trainings virtually. So that was done successfully, so that can easily be scaled up. Reduce the number of people in training venues, either by increasing the number of trainers or the training session, or staggering of the training. And of course, selection of trainings with adequate space to allow room for proper physical distancing. Next slide, please. So consider testing the operational efficiency, quality of COVID-19 prevention, and coverage outcomes of different models of integrated IT and SMC campaigns in other states in the context of COVID-19, such as comparing distribution of the single phase versus the double phase, and the door-to-door versus the fixed distribution point approaches. That should give some interesting perspective on the various differences. Next slide, please. All right, then coming to the costing budget analysis done by Eli and Joshua. Next slide. So the mitigation measures increased the cost of ITN campaigns. This remains true even when campaigns shift to the one phase, that's a single phase versus the double phase campaigns. This is mainly because the days are longer and the trainings have to be staggered, so more personnel have to be paid. So that had some budget implication, and especially micro logistics, where you move the nets from the distribution hub to the households. Then impact on distribution budget is quite significant. So with a range of 7% to 32% increase relative to the pre-COVID budget in this context. However, distribution budget is only a third or less of the total budget when ITN costs are included, meaning the impact of the overall financial cost is likely to be less than 10% in this context. Analysis, however, was limited by use of budgets versus the final expenditure in terms of provider perspective, low levels of community transmission in Nigeria during campaigns, and availability of true comparison. So need to estimate counterfactuals. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, COVID-19 mitigation measures will increase the cost of ITN distribution budgets from about 10 to 30%. Impacts on the total cost of ITN campaigns it will be limited, but still large enough to require specific consideration in budget development. Shift to one phase campaign are likely not substantially cost saving because the distribution hubs are replaced, distribution points are replaced by distribution hub, and last mile logistics costs are shifted to the provider instead of the household because they don't have to come out to the distribution hub. So micro logistics has to be taken. I think that is my last slide. Next. All right, thank you. So this is, in collaboration with the amazing AMP team. So just to appreciate them for all the hard work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatima. It's great to hear about those results and how you looked at both the qualitative and quantitative evaluation, including these cost drivers. So thanks for that. So we're going to move to our discussion time. Is your colleague Philip going to join us as well for discussion?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
He's here.
So Dr. Philippe Okoko, if you would like to join us for the panelists, if your bandwidth allows, you can. Oh, you're here. Great. Thank you very much.
I'm right here with her.
That's great. That's even better. So I'll just introduce you to everybody. You're part of the National Malaria Elimination Program with Nigeria, and you head the Integrated Vector Management Unit. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with you.
So we'll have our first question for Jessica. You briefly mentioned coordination. Did you find that the majority of NMCPs were able to coordinate with their national COVID-19 task force in adapting their strategies and activities? And if so, is there anything specific that facilitated the strong coordination?
So thank you for that question. Indeed, most PNLPs and NMCPs were able to coordinate with the COVID-19 task forces. I think from the review and the case studies, it was simply because of the massive concern that malaria mortality, morbidity would increase. And so there was the push, as I said, from WHO to encourage countries to move forward on their ITN campaigns to prevent malaria. And with that, you saw the donors and the partners and the task forces really coming together to coordinate and to adapt and to revise policy as needed.
Great, thank you. So I'll move to the next questions from the chat, but again, if anyone has wants to ask a question verbally, you're welcome to increase the interaction. But other than that, I'll continue on the questions from the chat. So Fatima and Philip, this is a question for you. The work on the analysis of the end process data has led to some additional changes to the methodology. Can you explain what changes you have made based on the lessons from the COVID-19 analysis?
Okay, so yeah, we're able to review the methodology we're using in the past because previously we are not using the LQS methodology. So we're able to adapt that and pilot it actually in 2 campaigns this year and review it again and make it more efficient and effective for our needs. I don't know if Mr. Okoko wants to add more.
Yeah, so basically, just like she said, it's the LQS approach that we have now brought in.
Yeah.
And one is to increase the power of the evaluation. And in that way, we are able to have a better understanding of what has happened within the states. So these are some of the kind of things that we have brought in, just to improve our output and the outlook of the campaign exercises.
Okay, great, thank you. Back to you, Jessica. Did any of the countries adopt digital tools as a measure to mitigate the spread of COVID-19? And were there modifications by countries to the already existing data collection tools to mitigate COVID-19?
Thanks. I just want to again preface that this is a very select and small group of countries that this presentation and the data that I presented is coming from, but within those, in some cases, as I mentioned, some countries decided that to keep their paper-based systems, simply because the budgets weren't in place. And others, with the increase in airtime for the budgets for airtime, the budgets again were not in place. Some countries did adapt for digital tools, but then again, as we've even seen in Nigeria, there were issues around those adaptations just to technology platforms and availability.
Okay.
But again, the paper will be published very soon.
Yeah, I'm sure we all look forward to that. Fatima and Philip, I have a question for you. The Global Fund and PMI funded campaigns used different strategies and adaptations. Of these adaptations, does the NMEP plan to retain any of them? And if so, which ones and why?
So in campaign implementations and strategies that are proposed locally, one thing we try to maintain is some level of flexibility because of the diverse nature of the country. I'll give you an example. For instance, if you're looking at door-to-door single phase as against fixed distribution points, one of the things that have happened that is a very positive takeaway is the increased active uptake of ITNs when you are doing door-to-door, as against when you are doing fixed distribution point distribution and you are left at the mercy of the beneficiaries. What I mean now is, except they come out, they don't get nets. But now when you go door-to-door, you are able to give it to them. And it looks like that's one way we want to go, or retain. because we are sure that as many people as possible are having access to the nets, as against when we used to do fixed distribution points. So these are some kinds of adaptations we would love to retain, and it would be good if across board we can deploy it. But we also know too that the settings across the country are not exactly the same everywhere. So under certain circumstances, it would be maybe the fixed distribution points preferred, you know, with minimizing the crowding at the distribution points. That will mean increasing the number of distribution points in those locations so that you have less people coming to one location at the same time. So these are just a few examples to point out.
Yeah, no, definitely important to adapt with regards to where you're doing it. Did you have anything to add, Fatima, on that? So Jess, back to you. What were challenges associated with using virtual platforms in settings with internet limited connection? And what were the mitigation measures? You're on mute, Jessica.
I can give the example of Uganda. And as some of you may recall, there were some very strict movement restrictions in Uganda when COVID first came out. So they did use quite a number of virtual platforms, using Zoom, trying to use airtime phone calls for supervision and monitoring. But ultimately, the lack of a good connectivity at community level and district level in some cases really forced them to first move a little bit more to district level supervision, but also to get permissions to be able to travel for virtual meetings, because they really needed to ensure that all of the adaptations were being adhered to. So that is one example I can provide.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Fatima and Philip, you have anything to add on that question as it relates to the different countries? If not, we can move to the next question.
So you were talking about virtual meetings?
Yeah, exactly. The question was to Jessica, but I thought it would be interesting to hear from you as well. Was what were the challenges associated with using virtual platforms in settings with internet limited connection, and what were the mitigation measures?
Okay, so challenges go even beyond network connections. Getting full attention in virtual meetings or trainings can be quite challenging, because you are left at the mercy of the person on the other side. You aren't seeing what they're doing, and they could be multitasking, so giving you maybe half or 1/4 attention. So at the end of the day, the impact that you wanted to make may not be made at the end of the day. So one thing that we are trying to do in country these days is a kind of hybridized version of meetings or trainings. So we have some group of people that are physically in one location, whereas those that are unable to make it to the physical meeting connect virtually from wherever they are. Even though that may also have its own shortcomings, but at least that's one way of improving the number of persons that you get their full attention during the session. So that's just one point of view. Thank you.
Great. No, I think we're all having also some fatigue around Zoom meetings and all the rest. It is difficult to retain attention, for sure. So even more difficult for trainings. So a question for you, back to you, Fatima. Any recommendations on the ideal number of phases? Do we still want or need 2 phases when things are back to normal, inverted commas, post-COVID?
As Mr. Phillips said earlier, the single phase allowed for better coverage. We would strongly recommend the single phase door-to-door because, like you say, you have more coverage and it's more convenient for the beneficiaries, even when they are not at home, because the period of mobilization and distribution is extended. House visits are possible. You can adapt your visits to when, for example, farmers or fishermen that go out early in the morning, you target the time that they'll be at home either early in the day or much later in the day to be able to reach out to them. So definitely recommend single phase, but however, our guideline is designed to adapt flexibility and you know, take into consideration the local context or the implementer's policy.
Okay, great. So another question for you, Fatima and Philip. What measures will you use to adjust to the cost increases, and are increased domestic resources an option?
So that might be an option. I will not say a yes or no to that. It might be an option depending on the context you are looking at it. But one thing that I think we should target at more is the efficiency of the exercise, ensuring that as many people as possible get the nets and they get the messages, and then they are complying with the messages. I think if we're able to score a big percentage on that, whatever the cost was would have been worth it. So beyond maybe domestic resource mobilization, then the worst that can happen is that we could look at areas that we could consider not super critical in the whole scheme of events, and maybe cut down on those particular areas, whereas we strengthen the other aspects that we feel will make the most impact. It's difficult to now tell you is this or that because this will require maybe deeper analysis of what has happened in terms of expenditure.
Yeah. I was wondering, Jessica, did you have anything to add on that based on your review?
No, I was going to say, Philip, that question was mine. And having
back to
you. And I mean, you know, we worked on the process evaluation together, of course. And so it's just Nigeria the budget is so big and there's so many different challenges. It makes you wonder with all the various limitations and envelope where you could go. But I think you answered it perfectly, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So we have another question as well for Fatima and Philip. What measures will you use to adjust to the cost increases? So sorry, I already read that one, excuse me.
Yeah.
Did the single phase reduce the campaign duration? And what will you do next time?
Yeah, so yes, the campaign duration reduced with single phase. It used to be 60 days when it was fixed point distribution. But with the single phase door-to-door, it came down to 53 days. So that was a reasonable reduction and subject to further evaluation, you know, because like I said earlier on, I think instead of looking at just numbers and things like that, we should look critically at impact at the end of the day. What are we doing that will give the most impact? Maybe you call it in the shortest possible time, or even if it's the longest possible time, but at least what makes the most impact. And I think maybe that's one area we should look at the most. so that we could strengthen those areas within the whole structure of campaign implementation that gives us that outcome at the end of the day. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah, thank you. We have a couple more questions and a couple more minutes, so we'll continue. So again, a question for Fatima and Philip. Any noted or foreseen challenges in moving to virtual meetings or trainings, and any recommendations on how to overcome these? For example, any recommended specific recommended trainings?
Well, as you go down at the national, at the state level, the challenges are less. People at the state and national level have been having a lot of online meetings. So mostly at that level, the challenge is network. But as you move further down to the LGA and ward level, in addition to connectivity issues, you have even the skills, the such skills to be able to participate in the training virtually. And you have issues of multiple health interventions taken up at the same time. So like Mr. Philip said, because it's virtual, then you're more likely to get people doing multiple tasks at the same time and not giving you the proper attention for your own training. So you want to add to that?
Yeah, so, and as you go down the ladder, virtual meetings become more challenging. Yeah. Jessica will bear witness to this. Yeah. They tried virtual KIIs and it was a heck of a time for them. Yeah. So as you go down the ladder, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And what we will really recommend at that level will be physical trainings, physical meetings, maybe more classrooms to reduce the number of persons per class. But that will mean you need more facilitators to handle this. So these are additional cost implications, but that may give you better impact in the long run. So
yeah,
that much.
Yeah, that could increase also the number of days if you reduce the number of people per classroom.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much to all of you. I think we're at time in terms of our discussion. So thanks so much for your availability and for sharing all of your insights. That was very interesting and will be great also for all the other countries.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we'll move now to, let me just go back to my agenda. To our last presentation from Marcy Erskine, whom we all know, but she is IFRC's manager for malaria programs and AMP's technical lead. And Marcy will be sharing with us the considerations for AMP's partnership in 2022 and 2023. So over to you, Marcy.
Thanks, Suzanne. Philip, you're a very hard act for me to follow because you are very calm and slow speaking, and I'm generally quite the opposite. So I will do my best. My presentation is going to kind of highlight a few things that we've already discussed, and then it's also going to bring up a few new things that we might want to think about moving forward. Okay, so I've come a long way from gray background and black text. I made this little word cloud for us for this year. I think I've tried to create this with a number of words I think we've all been thinking about over the last couple of years. But I think, to take a few minutes together to think through some of these words and what they mean to all of us now. And while we're doing that, I just want to congratulate national programs on the resiliency they've shown. I'm still working on the numbers, as Jason mentioned, but I think we're probably close to 180 million nets last year. A third of those held over from 2020. Okay, so each slide is going to be a bit of a different theme. So let's see how we do. So my first consideration for the partnership is that expanding our digitalization wish list will improve our campaign efficiency. So this means instead of focusing just on registration and distribution, we should really look at the full package. And that includes everything from planning and budgeting through to supervision and monitoring, and then as well human resources management. I think this is something we need to think about as a full package. I'm not going through this. You can go to the link after. This is some work that was done by Trop Health. My slide. Oh, okay. So this year we've been working a little bit with countries who are transitioning to digital tools, and we've been keeping a prospective tracker. So really looking at where did you start on your thinking about digital tools, and where are you from kind of week and month to month. And I think it's really important to note that there are a lot of areas that we need to do better planning so that we can really minimize the delays, because some of the decision making takes time around the platform. When we don't know the platform, then we don't know which devices, then we delay on procurement. And so I think we need to really start to be early and then identify what technical needs, both internal, because even if we don't have the expertise within the malaria control program, we definitely probably have it within the Ministry of Health or other government departments in a country. So I wanted to also hit on a presentation we had on the first day. Improving our micro-planning is going to improve our ability to reach everybody. So this is just an example of what we've all been doing. So a hand-drawn map on the left, and then on the right, a geospatial map. And I think this really demonstrates the difference between what we think are our boundaries and what our boundaries actually are if we were to use the official administrative boundaries. Again, I think, this has come up a few times over the last few days, but working in partnership and leveraging existing data and information and tools can help us all move forward more quickly. And that's not just for ITN campaigns, that's immunization, NTDs, and other interventions that are delivered through campaign platforms. I think we need to talk a lot more about reimagining integration. I think there's a lot of fear of us trying to do full-scale integration, and what does that mean and how difficult will it be? But there's definitely a way to reimagine integration for more effective use of data, information, and resources, both within and across the health programs. So this slide is important for me. I think we're talking a lot about digitalization, but we need to train beyond the device. In this data, this is data looking at the percentage of nets that were allocated correctly to households with an 80% cutoff. And in this data, you can see that very few of the areas actually passed on this indicator. And what's important here is that this could be any reason. Maybe the definition of a household was not clear, but the fact is that this is digital data, and the errors here are from humans. They're not from the device. It calculated correctly based on the number that was put in. So just training on how to use the device isn't actually going to necessarily improve our efficiency. And this is a big one, I think, for many of us. I know that there will be a meeting that Grid 3 will organize, funded by the Gates Foundation, and really focused on the issue of trying to fix the denominator. We continue to shift our denominators. We've discussed before that we have one denominator for ITN campaigns and a completely different denominator for case management. And if we really had that number of people, we'd need more case management to meet their needs. Amelia and Hannah both discussed this on day one. We need to sustain access to effective ITNs. And to do that, we need more functional continuous distribution channels to make sure that people have access to ITNs when and where they need them. We need, as a partnership, to advocate for continuous distribution beyond pilots where it's appropriate. More frequent campaign cycles don't solve our access problem, and they create additional challenges for national malaria programs. We know that access drops almost immediately. So whether you go from 36 to 30 months I don't think you're still going to see the effectiveness you need to see for the impact we want to have. If we want to go to more frequent campaigns and have national malaria programs constantly in a campaign cycle, then we need to invest in the human resources structure that national malaria programs will need. So any way you look at it, there's going to be a cost for moving to those more frequent campaigns. And I think we can offset that by moving to more sustained continuous distribution channels. So this is some new work that is happening right now. And this is a graph that Hannah has generated, and we'll be doing more work on this. But we may need to consider gender as an important factor for ITN access. And in the graph, you'll see that the green dots are no difference. The blue dots are really showing male-headed households are prioritized. And the orange or pink dots are showing that female-headed households are prioritized. And this could be important data for national programs for planning. I think we've talked about this, and Luis's presentation was excellent. We need to improve planning and budgeting for waste management and consider our environmental footprint. And I want to really highlight that we've done a lot of thinking on this for campaigns, but we haven't done a lot of thinking on it for routine. And if anybody can tell me what's happening to all of those packages, which might be, 60 million, 70 million packages a year, I would be interested to hear it. But I think it's not been an area of focus for us to date. And so I think this is something we need to look into a little bit more. Eddie talked about this yesterday, and we know that there will be the convening that's coming up in May in Liverpool, where we can really hear more from national programs. But ITN quality is a factor, and we do need to address it now to avoid a lack of trust in ITN efficacy. We've come a long way, but we're not there yet. And if we start to see people using nets less, then we're investing a lot of resources with very little return on those investments. So on SBC, improving ITN care and repair behavior requires an investment. I was on a call today. It was great. They were asking about having supervisors by, the number of teams to supervise. And into the chat went, well, we could probably cut communication. And it's always where we cut. But, Hannah's recently and Albert have shown data that we could actually improve and extend the lifespan of our nets by 7 months, 8 months, if we're effectively doing care and repair. So actually investing in this may reduce our need for more frequent campaigns, but it's the area that we don't want to invest in because we think it's too soft. And the graph on the right just shows you the time to hanging. And generally that time to hanging is about 6 months after receipt. So when our SBC ends at the time of the campaign, we're potentially missing when rumors might arise because maybe those nets aren't going to be used for another 6 months. But at that time, we don't have any budget for communication. We've talked about this today with Clarice and Chris and Julian, but desynchronized delivery of different ITM types is really a challenge. And it's not only a COVID-related challenge. We saw this as early as 2019 with the Burkina Faso campaign. And this is creating just an enormous amount of work for national programs to realign planning to when nets will actually arrive in the country. And I'll give the example of Cameroon, where in fact, we're only on the first phase and it's already been split into a phase 1A and a phase 1B just to align with ITN types, which means that campaign now goes from this period to a longer period. And then we're into the second phase and we're trying to overlap activities. And this actually creates quite a challenge for programs. Sorry, I'm trying to change it, but the chat is coming up. So I thought the comic here was appropriate, maybe a little bit too blunt, but I do think that reaching IDPs, refugees, and hard to reach populations, it requires a sustained investment and appropriate technology and channels that ensure continuous ITN access. And, you know, we continue to focus on core vector control interventions of NETS and IRS. And I think as a partnership, we need to discuss if these are actually effective vector control interventions in these contexts. So this is something that we will work on this year. So Jessica and Joe will be working on this with the UNF Foundation, but this is something as a partnership I think we need to focus more on. Otherwise, I think we just keep reaching the same people and missing the same people every time we move. I think it's going to change. Okay. I think I bring this up every year. I think we need to use data and consider what is effective and what is efficient in urban areas. We spend a lot of resources to put out ITNs in mass campaigns in urban areas. We know that in many of those areas, people don't want nets. They're not going to put a hole in their wall. They're going to use air conditioning. And so trying to blanket urban areas, I think, is a very ineffective use of resources. And I also think it's an ineffective use of time. So this is Susie's slide. I know she had to leave, but she puts this slide in every year to see if I will present it. So I am going to present it only because she put a comic in this year to try to encourage me. So we do have now 3 main channels for AMPTA. The first one I think you're familiar with, which is the RBM Partnership to End Malaria. And for this TA, it's very much focused TA, generally short term, and you know, try to limit the funding that goes to a single country through this mechanism, because that affects the ability of other countries to actually access TA. We've also been fortunate in 2021 to have funding from the United Nations Foundation and the Gates Foundation. And that funding has allowed us to do really tailored support. So if a country requests just, can you review our plan? We are able to do that now because we have resources, and we don't need to make it a long drawn out process of a request. We can very quickly, within 24 to 48 hours, do a turnaround for a national program on a document and do a few calls. And that is adding up to a few hours of work for a TA provider. And this level of flexibility has been really critical for AMP to be able to actually respond quickly to needs and to respond in a way that national programs want. Not everybody wants a heavy TA lift, and not everybody needs it. And I think that's a sign of success. And we should also be responding to what national programs want and need. And finally, for countries that do want intensive TA, you can do that through the Global Fund grants. And so you allocate your budget within your grant, and then you sign a service provider agreement with IFRC. And then the best news, I think, of 2022, AMPTA can now be in person. So we have just completed, well, we're just completing a mission in Cameroon. I think the team has been extremely happy to see their colleagues again. And so I think this is now, the reality is that we're back a bit more to a quote unquote normal. Do make TA requests early. The roster is light right now. We're just working on filling it. And then one message to the national programs from us is really the importance of making sure that there are people to work with. Everybody is so busy. So when you want to work, we should all just make sure we allocate the time to work together. I'm going to stop there. We will be organizing a few training sessions over the course of 2022, and we'll announce those on the AMP Partners meeting in the next few weeks. And so on that, I believe I can't, everybody's chatting and I can't get back to the slide deck. So yeah, thanks. So yeah, I'll stop there. I've put back up my word cloud with an arrow, hopefully pointing forwards and to a positive direction for us all in 2022 and 2023. So I'll stop there. And because I write the agenda, there's no Q&A for this session. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcy, for really those crisp and to-the-point considerations and touching on some of the key points over the last 3 days. And I've really been loving your comics or your cartoons in those slides. So I'm now going to hand over to Drake Zimmerman from Rotarian Against Malaria to present us with the much anticipated 2021 AMP Awards.
Thank you so much. My name is Drake Zimmerman. I think I'm tagged here. We got the awards up. Every year, the Alliance for Malaria Prevention puts out awards. We usually give out capes. I'm sorry we can't meet in person. I look forward to being able to do that in the future again. And we at AMP decide which countries or individuals should receive awards. Now, in this year, basically that list would be the next 4 or 5 days worth of presentations. So we've had taken the very hard choice to get it down to just a couple. Marcy never disappoints, I read in the chat, and Marcy is the toughest act to follow. So if anybody wants to move fast, follow Marcy. And if you can keep up, my hat's off to you. So in these major accomplishments, we've distributed more than 160 million nets we've been able to identify in 2020, and a lot of them came in and were distributed in 2021. Marcy said we're at above 180. I think the numbers are actually racking up higher to topping 200 million. And it was difficult for the core group, to give you an understatement, to work with the national malaria programs. We're so happy to be able to go back in person and to work together. The core group congratulates all of the national programs on their remarkable work and their ability to keep progress in malaria work, which was that wasn't a foregone conclusion 2 years ago. It took an immense amount of work for you to get that done and to get the distributions working as planned. So in 2020, unfortunately, AMP lost 2 major leaders, supporters, and friends. These people are our friends. The MP core group decided last year to honor these individuals this year. We're honoring them, whose work keep malaria high on the agenda of those countries, and especially to use data in decision-making processes. That used to be a dream, now it's becoming a reality. It's getting better and better and better as we go along. So, and we want to ensure leadership and capacity buildings as these people modeled it. For their teams. They are an inspiration to all of us. They provide awards in their names. The core group took a decision to maintain these awards going forward. The first one is the Federal Ministry of Health for Sierra Leone, in honor of Samuel Juanes Smith. He was a program manager in Sierra Leone. Here's Annette, and please click the next slide. He worked tirelessly to ensure that the programs went on. We're giving this award to the Federal Ministry of Health of Nigeria. We're presenting it to Perpetua Mohibi. I hope I pronounced that close enough. And the National Malaria Program of Nigeria. In 2021 alone, they distributed more than 35 million ITNs, which is more than some countries do in a major campaign. This was a partial country campaign, and NMP, the National Malaria Elimination Program of Nigeria, has worked very, very hard to improve its ITN campaign delivery, as we just heard, and improve the use of data, particularly focusing on strengthening the process and the use of data in assessment and in driving their campaigns. This is an evidence-driven campaign that gets better and better and better. The whole team has worked tirelessly to engage new donors, and we congratulate them for mobilizing resources to fill the gaps and leaving no orphan states behind. This award this year goes to Nigeria in honor of Dr. Samuel Juanes Smith of Sierra Leone, who we lost last year. The next slide, please. The Zambia National Malaria Elimination Program has inspired Alliance for Malaria Prevention and National Malaria Programs for its use in geospatial mapping for all the improved targeting of the malaria interventions. Now, Rotarians out of Seattle and around the world support programs in various areas to train community health workers. We train them, especially in malaria, and equip them. And it is the geospatial mapping for improved targeting of malaria interventions with strong focus on achieving malaria elimination that is getting scaled up there so very successfully. This award is in honor of Dr. Arroz. Dr. Jorge Arroz was a technical manager for the Global Fund and for the project in Mozambique. His passion for data is what drives this award. And he wanted to use it and used it so effectively to ensure continuous improvements in the program planning and implementation. That's why we want to approve the award for data use to the entire Zambia National Malaria Elimination Program. They're doing a fabulous job, and we're really, really happy with them. For the core group and as Rotarians, we have this special soft spot in our hearts for them because they're doing such work. Rotarians have stood up and applauded, given them standing ovations for their work. The national program wants to make sure there's available data in every province on disease burden to have the population and the access and to gauge this to ensure high quality service. Those efforts are highly commendable. They're very, very useful beyond being commendable. They focus also on monitoring impact and process indicators to ensure that the programmatic improvements go on. We ensure that epidemiological indicators are tracked and we use the data for decision-making, policy and strategy revisions to keep the progress moving forward. I say we because I'm on the Malaria Partners International Board, as well as chairing the Rotarians Against Malaria Global Board. And all those efforts are being cheered on and supported financially and with technical support that we can help muster so that those policy and strategy revisions keep the progress moving forwards towards elimination. Malaria is being tracked and it's dropping dramatically there. The continued investment in a strong community health worker structure, which we're now expanding to Uganda, by the way, supports the Zambia National Malaria Control Programs and ensures that all the systems are in place for malaria elimination in the country. I want to underline that. Malaria elimination is what we're after. These interventions, these additions, in honor of Dr. Jorge Arroz, have dropped malaria so dramatically in some areas that we're talking about elimination in entire areas. We Rotarians are taking methods that we're refining in other areas. Often RAM Australia has worked in the South Pacific to get the countries down to zero and keep them there. We're taking those adaptations and taking them to Zambia and elsewhere. And we're taking all of the work of the Zambians and elsewhere and taking it wherever it needs to go. The final prize that we have, the final award, and the last time we met in person, I gave Alexander Humph a cape for all of his great work, a Superman cape. These are floor-length capes. I don't have an example for you right in front of me, and it wouldn't fit on the screen. It's about 5.5 feet long, a full-bodied cape. And I gave one to Alex for his wonderful work over the many years with BASF supporting all of the work that we're doing. Thank you for changing the slide. So how do we get, the comment is, how do you get to be younger looking? I think you're referring to Marcy there. This award has been reflected in what we've gone over in day one of the meeting, which was assuring effective access to ITNs, and day two of the meeting, scaling up new ITN types. The interceptor net, if you read those slides in there, that was BASF's intervention, and they worked very hard to develop it and now to distribute it. They've had such perseverance in moving the needle forward, moving the efforts forward. The interceptor net was a great innovation, and they're improving on those already. So the Interceptor G2Net and this perseverance, both Achim Redding and Alexander Heimsch of BASF, is just something we want to stand up and applaud. If we were in the same room, we would exactly do that. We would all stand up and be applauding. It is really rare to get the #1 award, and this is an award for industry that with BASF, who has been a huge help getting these innovations together, and then the second huge hurdle, getting them through the regulatory processes to enter the market. This is especially hard in a global pandemic, as we all know, and this has created a significant supply in the time of significant supply constraints. So we encourage BASF public health team to continue to innovate in all these areas. I don't know if they need encouragement. I'm laughing because I see them as just, this is their natural way of being. We're so pleased, and we want to congratulate them, all the team at BASF, and all the people who've worked with them. RAM Global wants to thank them specifically for the help with containers of nets that we've purchased from them for distribution in Colombia and in Tanzania, where we likewise want to scale up the community health workers using more and more data to take malaria to zero. BASF has been a hardcore partner. We are so pleased at their immediate response, their enthusiastic response, especially in these very, very, very hard times. I want to say thank you so much to all of the national malaria control programs. Rotarians please connect with your local Rotarians. There are 1.2 million Rotarians. We're working hard to get them involved locally with you. Thank you so much. I look forward to giving out nets in the future. Nets, well, I want to give the big capes in the future, because there's so many of you who deserve this, working through this very, very hard time. This is the first time in history that we've come in on time for my portion of the presentation. So I guess I get a Marcy Award in the year to come. Yeah. So thank you, everything. And I turn this back to Susanna.
Great, thank you so much, Drake. And yes, we are missing to see, the capes and seeing all the countries receive the capes. But a big congratulations to all of our well-deserved awardees, to our 3 awardees for this year. So we've come to the end of the second annual virtual meeting. And I'd like to thank all the presenters and of course, all of you for your questions and participation and staying until the end for those who could. We just have one final poll for you that will be coming up on this slide. And I'll try and wrap up at the same time. But if you could go back to your phone on www.menti.com, and the code is the same, but I'll read it out. It's 68329250. So as we do that, I'll yeah, if we can, okay, thank you. So the first question is, how satisfied were you with today's AMP Partners meeting? And I'll just do a quick wrap up as we see the questions coming in. But we started the day by hearing from Clarice, Chris, and Julian that we will continue to face considerable challenges in global supply chain, including shortages of containers, vessels, and raw materials, and possible increase in product costs. But there are some key mitigation actions that we can take, and also that donors are supporting countries to take. We also then heard from Madagascar about their experience with mobilizing resources and to adapt to COVID-19, along with challenges and solutions. After our break, we also heard from Mozambique on their innovative waste management efforts, including hiring a private recycling company to gather all the plastics and from individual wrapped nets. So please continue to vote. I see 17 people have voted, but most of the people are very satisfied with today's AMP's Partners meeting. So that's really good to hear. So please continue voting. Maybe we can go to the next slide, because I know that we're a little bit at time. The next question is, how would you rate the relevance of the sessions today to your own work? So very relevant, relevant, not relevant, or no comments. And I'm just going to conclude with my wrap up. So after Mozambique, we also heard from Liberia and Liberia's experience in terms of mitigating potential dangerous rumors, which I think is applicable to so many of the countries today. And after our last break, we heard from Jessica Rockwood on the adaptations to prevent COVID-19 across multiple countries and across different areas of the campaign. And then from a country's perspective, from Nigeria, with their results on both qualitative and quantitative results. And finally, we heard from Marcy with some key considerations on moving forward into the next few months, but also the year ahead. So from the poll here, in terms of relevance to our work, overall, we seem to think that all the presenters' presentations were very relevant or relevant. So thank you for that. And we'll move to the last question, which is a ranking order again. So which of today's sessions were most helpful for you in your daily work? And if you can start with rating as first, the one that was the most helpful for you. So it looks like sharing partner experience, followed by country. Okay, so the country focused presentations. Seems like that was also a trend from yesterday, where the country focused presentations also was the most helpful for our work. So country focused presentations followed by sharing partner experience, technical updates, and then research and evaluation updates. So we'll continue to leave the poll open, so you're welcome to continue to vote. And we just wanted to take maybe a last minute to take a picture of all of us on video, if that's possible for those of you that have stayed online. So I have already done my closing remarks. So I think we can just close for the day, and just to say thank you again to everyone. And I hope that we can all see each other next year for in-person meeting this time. But it was lovely to be here today, and yeah, wishing you well for the next few months.